Hi everyone, and welcome to Deep Geek Live. This is an open Q&A. Yes, the wings coming from my head is deliberate. I do like the look. This is an open Q&A about House of the Dragon, Rings of Power, Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, whatever you want, really. From my next live stream onwards, for the next while, my live streams are going to be pre-show live streams. So these Thursday live streams are going to turn into pre-show live streams for the Rings of Power. I started doing Sunday live streams as pre-shows for House of the Dragon. So I thought we'd just throw in a random any other questions you've got before we get into the business of the seasons proper. But obviously, yes, this week we have had House of the Dragon episode 1. If you've not seen it yet, I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. It was everything that I wanted, and in some ways even a little bit more. I really enjoyed it. Rings of Power is coming out September the 1st or 2nd, depending on where you are in the world. And there are, I believe, still a few tickets left for the free live screenings, which are happening all across the world later on, or I think the beginning of next week. So do go and check that out if you'd like to see the first 2 episodes of The Rings of Power, which will be dropping on the 1st or 2nd at the same time anyway. But if you want to see them a little bit early, if you want to see them at a cinema rather than on your TV at home, then do go and try and check that out. The other thing I want to say before we get into the many questions I've got, I will be framing this around my patrons' questions, but I will pick up as many questions from the chat as I can. The other thing I want to say is to remind you that History of Westeros, friends of the channel, have recorded an interview with George R.R. Martin. They had, I think they got certainly over an hour and a quarter worth of proper in-depth Q&A with him. They got to ask him whatever they wanted. He answered their questions. That will be coming up. Keep an eye out for that. I believe they're going to be uploading it later today, tomorrow, as a podcast, but also on their YouTube site. So maybe one of the moderators could put a link somewhere if you're watching this live. I would highly recommend it. I spoke to Aziz literally about an hour ago, and he was still really pumped from this. There is a lot of good stuff that George R. R. Martin came out with there. Some new bits of information as well that it made even Aziz, who knows more about the world of A Song of Ice and Fire than anyone I know, made even him go, whoa, that's new. So do check that out. I would highly recommend it. But let's get into some of the questions that we've got today. We had, I think I've had a couple of super chats. Marvin Martin saying, doesn't wearing black make the Night's Watch targets in snow? Can you explain the theory of the White Walker trees taking over the world in the end? Well, the wearing black make the Night's Watch targets in the snow? Yes, I guess it does. I think that the idea of them wearing black is, as much as anything else, this is an idea that for a lot of people going there, this is sort of a penance. This is a punishment in some way. So they're wearing black. And it also, like any uniform, it kind of depersonalizes people. Everybody wears exactly the same thing. So that's the idea. Yes, they could all wear white, but I guess it would get quite muddy quite quickly. So black kind of works. The theory of I think you mean weirwood trees taking over the world in the end. When you say, can I explain the theory of it? Well, I guess this is building on the Bran as king idea. And if that happens in the books, on the TV show, Bran was king, but didn't really make huge amounts of difference. But in the books, this is Bran extension of the Weirwood network. The idea that the Weirwood network have been working on this plan long term is very well developed within the books. So if they manage to get their person on the Iron Throne, then yes, you could say that they won. Callie Summers saying, why wouldn't the Citadel or the Night's Watch accept capable women, even if they are barred from positions of more power because of sexism? Why not let them join at lower levels? Why not as cooks or tailors in the Night's Watch? Well, I think the reason why this is the case is George R. R. Martin is basing these off of kind of knightly orders, particularly, and I think this might be a hint with the Night's Watch, to the fact that we think of them as being, as I said just a few moments ago, a lot of criminals being sent there, and this is not necessarily the place you want to go. When it started out, it was a knightly order. Effectively, this was a position of honor to be at the Night's Watch. This is only a few northern families still seem to hold to that tradition, but that's definitely where it was to start with. So this was a knightly thing, and we know that knights within George R. R. Martin's world, they are male. Why wouldn't women be allowed at lower levels? This is just, again, this is fitting in with this kind of medieval idea, is that it's if you stick away from all of the temptations of the flesh, then this apparently makes you a better fighter. We may or may not agree with that these days, but that, I think, is where George R. R. Martin was going with it. Sam Clontz II. Good day, Robert. Good day to you too. In your opinion, do you think the secret was passed all the way down to Rhaegar, or do you think he discovered it on his own? Yeah, so this, I will have a few questions coming at this from a few different angles. And I will say up front, if you've not watched House of the Dragon episode 1 now, I will be talking about stuff in that, so this might not be the video for you. The secret here is this dream, Aegon the Conqueror's dream, in which he had this kind of vision of the danger coming from the north and the Targaryens having to be sitting on the throne to unite Westeros in order to fight this great threat. That's the secret, which is passed down from generation to generation. There will be more on that next episode. So we've not reached the end of this story in show yet. There will be more information there. Was it passed all the way down to Rhaegar? Or do you think he discovered it on his own? I think there are a few points where it's entirely possible that there was a circuit break here, where the Targaryens passed it down from generation to generation, and then it stopped. I did a video on this, if you're interested, a day or two ago. There I kind of speculated on the idea of that the Dance of the Dragons may well be the thing that stopped it. Because if this is, as we're told, passed down from king to heir, then we've got at this present moment 2 or possibly 3 people who know this. Viserys knows it, Rhaenyra knows it, and possibly Daemon, because Daemon was the heir for a few years. Now, Viserys, we know, dies. Rhaenyra will also die, but presumably at some point she will pass this secret on to her heir. Her heir Jacaerys will die. When he dies, what does she do? And before he has children or anything like that, when he dies, what will she do? Well, presumably she will then tell her new heir, which was her son Joffrey. He was quite young, but maybe she did. What about when he died? Because he died. Did she then tell her new heir, who was Aegon? Well, possibly, but he was only going to be about 9 years old at the time. And we know that when he grew up, he hated dragons. He hated even the sight of a dragon egg. So if anywhere around there's like drawing a line in the sand, then it's there. Maybe he didn't take it forward himself. Even if that were the case, there are plenty of other points in the Targaryen family tree where you could say, okay, maybe this is ended. Maybe Baelor the Blessed decided, you know what, I'm getting rid of all of this Targaryens are closer to gods than men thing, all of these prophecies. We know that he had huge book burnings. Maybe it all died with him and his generation. In any event, I think it's likely, from what we've read, that Rhaegar was not told about this by his father. We were told that he read something in a scroll in a book and came out from that thinking that he was the prince that was promised. So it appears that he wasn't told by his father. So at that point, it had not been passed down. And then he is rediscovering things. Question from Philip saying, I wonder how the Song of Ice and Fire secret passed from Aenys to Jaehaerys, given Maegor. Maybe Jaehaerys learned it from his brother Aegon before Maegor killed him. Yeah, again, this is something else I kind of like picked up on in that video. There's so many different angles to this, it has to be said. We're not invited to look too closely at this. So Aegon presumably told his son Aenys, who then died, and Maegor took over by force. He wasn't the heir. And then Jaehaerys took over by force after Maegor died. Jaehaerys wasn't the heir. So what's possible here? Well, maybe the heir, their area, did know and did pass it on. That's entirely possible. It's entirely possible that others knew of this. Aegon maybe didn't just keep it to himself. Maybe he told his sister wives. It would certainly make sense if he's launching an entire invasion on the basis of a prophecy. It would make sense if he tells them as well. So Visenya may well have known it. Visenya may well have told Maegor. And who's Maegor going to tell? We don't know. But it's entirely possible that he could have told his heir earlier, and she could have told Jaehaerys. So there are ways around this. We're just not told about it. It's maybe something that we will learn at some point, but I don't think this is a key and devastating problem for this. I think that there are ways this could have happened. Yusuf El-Alam saying, will your future videos be safe for people who didn't read Fire and Blood? I don't want to spoil what people are calling Blood and Cheese. That title sounds good. So good, like the Red Wedding. I don't want to be spoiled. Okay, so yes, Blood and Cheese is great. My video, so this is my take on spoilers, is that I will not do what I would call show specific spoilers. So I will not do, if we get something leaked, such and such a thing happens in this episode coming up, I'm not going to be talking about that, but I will be talking about things that happened in the books. The book has been out for a while now, so that's my personal take. My videos I will try to give a content warning near the beginning to say this, but in episode breakdowns, generally speaking, I'm not going to be saying what happens in the future, but when we get to the deep dive videos, I will be. So that's the situation. But thank you for asking. It's I know different people have different levels of whether they wish to be spoiled or not, but that's where I am. There are certainly places you can get spoilers if you want, and there are some, actually we're talking about the history of Westeros, they do a couple of different podcast styles. One of them, I think they call one of them the Free Folk, which is any spoilers is fine, and one of them I think they call Unsullied, and they're going through it with someone who's not read the book and does not read any spoilers. So there's absolutely nothing there. So if you want something completely spoiler free, then I would highly recommend you check that out. Marissa Ball saying, will we see glass candles being used in House of the Dragon? But possibly. I'm not saying no. The question is where these glass candles are. There aren't many of them. in the world, it would appear. They're certainly down in the Citadel, so it's entirely possible. They presumably will be working because we've got lots of dragons around, but are we going to see them? There is no point in Fire and Blood where we're told that they're used. That doesn't mean they're not going to use them, but probably not. Philip saying one option could be to put a book/show spoiler banner on the screen so people instantly know. Good idea. Thank you very much. I will have a think about that. Okay, let's go. So Roman Lakovet saying, are we allowed to discuss the last episode today? Yes, today we can absolutely discuss it. If you've not watched it yet, apologies. As I say, feel free to watch this back later when you have watched the episode. Diego Godoy saying, hola Robert, hola. Regarding House of the Dragon, how much time do you think we will spend in the war between Daemon and Corlys versus the Triarchy? Just a couple of episodes, or may this extend to other seasons? Thank you. So I don't think it's going to extend to other seasons, although the implications will. This show is going to take us up to the outbreak of hostilities, the outbreak of war. Pardon me. Which means that it's going to go past the War in the Stepstones. The War in the Stepstones has a short-term important point, which is that it gives Daemon the opportunity to let off some steam and get himself, or crown himself effectively, a king, which will allow him, assume this is going to happen on the show, certainly in the book, to have his crown and then hand his crown over to his brother and get back into his brother's good graces that way. The longer term impact is that the Triarchy are then really annoyed at Daemon and Corlys, and as a result, when Otto Hightower on the other side of the Civil War writes to them and says, do you want to get involved? Then they say yes, because they hate Daemon and they hate Corlys. So that's probably a season 2 thing. It's an implication of what happens in this war. But in terms of how long we're going to see it, yeah, a couple of episodes, something along those lines. This isn't going to be a huge thing. George R.R. Tolkien saying, salutations, Robert. Salutations to you too. That episode was so great. I've rewatched it about 5 times now. It gets better every time. Paddy Considine absolutely kills it as Viserys. And Matt Smith, of course, truly an amazing duo. I was wondering about Aegon's prophecy and how it connects. I was wondering about what it holds for the future, in your opinion. Do you think this will mean Jon will end up on the throne when the White Walker threat actually arrives, or some other Targaryen? Vaegon, Dany, and will Aegon's Ice and Fire dreams be completed using the cat's paw dagger? Okay, so there's a lot of questions in that, but I think this kind of encapsulates a lot of the questions that people have. Is that, so we have this prophecy. Now what? What does this mean for the story? I think the first thing that we have to do is we have to say there is a show-only element to this. We saw it about the cat's paw dagger. We saw that the king carries it around. When he's talking to Rhaenyra about this, the camera pans in and focuses on his dagger. He's gripping hold of it. We've seen trailers where it's being held in the flames. We've seen Rhaenyra apparently reading off of it. So this appears to be, I don't think this is a spoiler really, this appears to be where it was written down. What the prophecy is, what the dream was, is written in glyphs or something on this dagger. So on the dagger. So the dagger is important. Now, the dagger has a very specific role in the books of A Song of Ice and Fire. On the TV show, however, way more significance, because as we know, at the end of all of this, it ends up in the hands of Arya, and Arya uses that to kill the Night King. So if we're thinking only show for just a moment, then quite literally, the prophecy, that dagger, which is the prophecy, is the thing which killed the Night King and destroyed the threat. So, yes, this is hugely important in the show. I don't think it's going to be like that in the books. I don't think we're going to end up... In fact, the showrunners were very clear that it was their idea that Arya would do this. So it's not going to be the same in the books. And I'm guessing that it's not going to be the same in terms of it's not going to have the writing. Maybe this got melted down and reforged or something, so it doesn't have that anymore. We don't know. In any event, it looks slightly different on the TV show in the two different versions, implying that some change did happen. The bigger question here, though, you asked whether all this means that Jon will end up on the throne or somebody else will end up on the throne. My take on this is that, yes, that certainly seems to be what the implication of all of this should be for the Targaryens, is that at the end of it all, there should be a ruling Targaryen king who unites the Seven Kingdoms, and that's what saves the realms of the living. Now, that's not how George R. R. Martin approaches any prophecy, really. He's always more interested in what it drives people to do, what a prophecy drives people to do. The prophecy is driving Viserys to go to huge lengths to keep his kingdom together. And this is where I believe George R. R. Martin is talking about this idea that Paddy Considine and the writing has brought a new layer of what he called tragic majesty to that role. Because if you read the book, then you get Viserys, he just comes across as quite a weak king, just hating conflict. And that seems to be the main thing that's driving him. What we've now got is this extra layer where he may hate conflict, but there's a reason for it. He wants to keep the family together because he thinks this is the most important thing for the future of humanity, is to keep his family together and on the throne. So he makes some decisions he might not want to do personally because he thinks that this will keep the Targaryens on the throne. So that's what seems to be going on there. Does this mean that Jon is going to end up on the throne? No, it doesn't mean he's going to end up on the throne. It means that people, if they know about this prophecy, what may want him to be on the throne. That does not mean that he actually will, or he even wants to himself. So who knows this prophecy? Who is it driving? What does it drive them to do? Those are the kinds of questions we need to be asking, rather than this is what the prophecy says, it's going to happen regardless. That's not the way that George R. R. Martin's prophecies tend to work. Roman Lakovets saying, King Viserys implied that dragons somehow caused the doom of Valyria. Many fans have assumed for a long time that the Faceless Men were involved in some way, but I guess it's not the case. Well, yeah, so we need to dig into a few layers here. I think we quite glibly, or we could quite glibly say, this came from George R. R. Martin, therefore everything about this is now true. It's not going to be as simple as that. It's not going to be as simple as that for a number of reasons. Firstly, because if this does come from George R. R. Martin, which it does, but asterisk, because I'll come back to that, then he might be wanting something slightly different for the TV show than are in the books. And he's already said that as he writes the books, he's changing the story. So do not assume that what is happening here now on the show is necessarily how things are going to be in however many years' time when he gets to A Dream of Spring. He could have changed his mind completely. The fans assuming that the Faceless Men were involved in some way, I don't think that this is... But now is this the dragons? I don't think this is necessarily an either or situation. We had, before we had all this, and I'll come on to what the dragon involvement might be in a second. Before we had all of this, we already had several different things going on. And what caused the doom of Valyria? Well, clearly an explosion. The Faceless Men seemed to be implying that they were involved somehow. There was a prophecy about Lannister gold causing the doom of Valyria. What's going on? How does this all tie in together? I did ages and ages and ages ago, I did a video setting out what I thought made sense of all of these things, which included all of those elements. That yes, this was the volcanoes, yes, this was the Faceless Men, and yes, this was Lannister gold. It all kind of fitted together. Now, what Viserys says was that, we shouldn't have dabbled in that. This is a thing which humans aren't meant to be. I wish I had the quote in front of me, but humans aren't meant to be dealing with this kind of thing. That's not necessarily dragons caused the doom of Valyria, full stop. He makes a link, but it's not a dragon came in and it was a dragon who sort of burned something which caused Valyria to blow up. Maybe it was they needed to stay there because of the dragons, and they needed to have a certain setup with the volcanoes and fires because of the dragons. And when that went wrong, the whole thing blew up. That would be exactly the same. That would work just the same, not just a dragon causing, so to speak, the doom of Valyria. But to take one step back again to George R. R. Martin, we know, and we haven't got the detail of this yet. Yes, this was cleared by George R. R. Martin. Yes, the idea that Aegon had a dream, had a prophecy to the Targaryens to invade Westeros. Yes, that appears to have come from George R. R. Martin. What that says, the wording of that, how much of that is from him, how much of that was written by Ryan Condal, the showrunner, we don't yet know. So these are the kinds of questions we need to sort of tease out before we start trying to draw firm conclusions for what this might mean for the books. Martin S. saying, I want to like the upcoming Rings of Power show. So this is Lord of the Rings stuff, the Rings of Power, and some scenes look amazing. However, the tone of the English language in the dialogue does not sound Tolkien-esque. Too generic, too present day. Well, I can't speak for the dialogue, all of it. I will see the first two episodes at some point. I'm still hoping I might get to see them a little bit early as well, but I certainly haven't seen them yet. So I can't speak for the dialogue as a whole. What I can say is that I know what the dialogue and dialect coaches have been talking about, and they have made quite a lot of positive noises about the different types of language that are used and the different styles. So this is how dwarves speak, this is how elves speak, this is how Harfoot speak, and so on. And the showrunners, when I was at that London event, the showrunners did say that they went into a level of detail, that they personally went into a level of detail of if they were writing a line of dialogue and they weren't sure about a word, if Tolkien never used a specific word because it was too modern, then they did not use it. Now, these are all positive things, but until we see the episode, these are all just words. The one bit of evidence that I do have is that if you take the I don't know which trailer it is. They come out with so many trailers. There was a trailer where it started with Gil-galad talking and Galadriel also speaking and saying something like, the days of peace are still here, or something along those lines. That was actually written in iambic verse. And for those who don't know, this is an English language poetry thing. Lots of different cultures and nations have different styles of poetry. One of the key things about English poetry is where the emphasis is when you're speaking a particular word. And iambic means that it's on the second beat. So it's da, 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 da. Shakespeare, if you ever listen to Shakespeare, a lot of what his stuff is iambic. So to be or not to be, that is the question. And it's like bam, 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 bam. And that is a rhythm which was specifically used for the elves. So the elves should have this kind of slightly higher language usage. All that said, I will judge this when I see it. I've got hope, but I will judge. This is not Tolkien's words. I would say, and this is the kind of thing that you can get quoted on quite easily. I would say, without having seen the show, 99% of the language used, the words, the lines are completely new. There is almost no Tolkien Second Age dialogue that we have. So they might be able to pull out a few things from a letter that Gil-galad wrote, or a few lines that we know that Isildur said, or something along those lines. But the vast majority of this is going to be new. So yeah, it's all up for grabs. I'm feeling hopeful. The showrunners have said the right things, but we will have to wait and see. The Irish Viking, thank you very much, saying, does Westeros have rules for war? Is there such thing as war crimes? I mean, they don't have like a Geneva Convention, if that's what you're asking, but there are traditions. So there are some things which are viewed as being beyond the pale. Now, whether it counts as war or not, then certainly you get things like the Red Wedding break rules of guest right and things like that. You cannot attack somebody if they're a guest in your home. That is a rule of war. Some of the things that Tywin did when he wiped whole houses out, completely destroyed them, this is where the Reigns of Castamere comes in, is because that's beyond the pale. But when they attacked the Lannisters, this is King's Landing at the end of Robert's Rebellion, and then just like he set his soldiers free to go and do whatever they wanted in the streets of King's Landing, nobody really objected. I mean, this was just accepted as being a part of what war was. Yes, it was bad and terrible and everyone hated it, but it wasn't seen as breaking a rule. So are there clear-cut laws? No. But there are some clear traditions as to what is fair play and what is not. Attach, Altinoth saying, hi Robert and hello everyone. For those who do not know, Attach is a fabulous artist, and the most recent, do correct me for exactly timings and everything, but the most recent Rise of the Dragon book, which is coming out under George R. R. Martin's name, which is a sort of a coffee table version of Fire and Blood. The front page of that, the illustration there of a dragon, is by Attach. So do check that out. Excellent, wonderfully talented artist there. Cloaked One, thank you very much. I love it when people do this. Pick up a question for Morrison. Towards the end of A Song of Ice and Fire, which families or characters will end up with the Valyrian steel weapons? And will we see other famous Valyrian steel weapons in House of the Dragon? As for House of the Dragon, we may see Vigilance, which is the high tower weapon. There's also House Royce's weapon, whose name I forget, which was lost in the attack on the Dragon Pit, the storming of the Dragon Pit. we'll probably see a few more. I can't off the top of my head think of what they are. We will see ice again, incidentally, when in House Stark eventually make it all the way down south. Then we know that Cregan Stark brings with him ice, and he executes people with ice right at the very end of the Dance of the Dragons. So we will see some more in terms of A Song of Ice and Fire. Which families and characters will end up with Valyrian steel weapons? Well, I think we've seen most of the distribution there. I think that characters who are heading north, who are going to be engaged in fighting with against the others in some way, will more often than not be the ones who get Valyrian steel weapons. So the interesting ones are things like Dark Sister, which I think is in Bloodraven's Cave north of the Wall. I think Mira will bring it back. Whether Mira ends up with this or someone else is a question for some debate. Blackfire, I think, will end up with whoever is sitting on the Iron Throne as a symbol of kingship or rulership. So I like the idea that the two constituent parts of ice will, after all of this, be brought back together and reforged as ice. Question from Donna Daly saying, "Hi, Robert. George R. Martin has his characters misinterpret prophecies. He definitely does. The Targaryens knew they were the only dragon riders left. Did they assume they had to rule when all that was really needed was dragons?" Well, this is an interesting one. So, what seems to have happened, if we're to take what Viserys says, is that they had their first dream. Daenerys the Dreamer had a dream which got them out from Valyria. That helped them escape. Then they're on Dragonstone, and they don't really do anything, to be honest, for 100 years. And you kind of understand for the first while there will be a little bit of shell shock about what happened, trying to figure out what happens next. But 3-4 generations go by before Aegon decides to invade Westeros. So do they think they were born to rule? If anything, this is a surprising amount of restraint for the Targaryens, because when they get to Westeros, they're all, we're closer to gods than men. And then, were they not thinking that on Dragonstone? If they were, then surely they would have started taking other places. It is curious, and maybe one day George R. Martin will tell us what happened in that 100 years. But in terms of, do they assume they had to rule? Not at that stage, but after Aegon, then yes. And after the dragons had gone, they seem to have assumed that they had to carry on ruling regardless of whether they still had dragons, but they tried to get dragons back anyway. Jimmy saying, "I reread the Jaehaerys chapter from the World of Ice and Fire book. Suggests that Alicent had to satisfy her king before her anxiety in House of the Dragon." So I think this is a mushroom thing. So there are lots of rumors in Fire and Blood. The first rumor was that, and we didn't actually see any of this on the TV show, as a much younger woman, when Jaehaerys was dying, an old king, she would go and read stories to him. Mushroom spread some rumors, almost certainly untrue rumors, about her, that maybe there was some more to it than that, but I don't think so. As for Viserys, again, yes, there are rumors that maybe she did. But you know what? They were both young, free, and single. Viserys perhaps not so young. So her having to satisfy him beforehand, I think that's just a little bit of a odd wording, if that's what it says in Fire and Blood. Perhaps they slept together before they got married. I don't think that's much of a biggie in George R. R. Martin's world. her anxiety in House of the Dragon. I have got a question on this from one of my patrons, and also I'll sort of pick up on this a little bit more. This is something. So I was expecting to see this more from Rhaenyra. Rhaenyra, we do read in Fire and Blood about her having a nervous habit of she wears lots of rings, and she used to just sort of like fiddle with the rings, twisting them around her fingers when she got anxious. Not Alicent. Why did they include this? I personally suspect that this is going to head towards a position where book readers tend not to like Alicent that much, tend to think that she's quite scheming, tend to think that she was completely unjustified in trying to get her son onto the Iron Throne. And on the basis of what we've read in Fire and Blood, I think that's probably a fair assessment. I suspect what we're going to get in House of the Dragon is a little bit more of a nuanced telling of this story, which allows us to, if not be sympathetic to the Greens' position, at least understand it. And as a starting point for this idea that Otto is the real bad guy, which incidentally, apparently this is what the actors themselves who they were asking. This came up in my live stream, pre-show live stream before episode 1. Apparently the actors, when asked who's the most evil character, all said Otto. So perhaps they're building it up that Otto's the real baddie mastermind, influencing and sort of pushing his daughter into things that she otherwise wouldn't do. So if so, the idea that she's got like a nervous habit that he's telling her to stop, that fits in with that. And maybe she's going to emerge from this in a better light than she does from the book. I think that's quite likely. Pardon me. Sorry. Question from Cloaked One. Thank you very much for picking up for Dutch Hulk about Bran. Could it be that he had seen the outcome of the war against the others, and that moved him to give the dagger to his sister Arya in the show? So in the show, this is purely show logic. It would appear that what they were trying to do there was Bran knew how to destroy the Night King, and he was setting everything up for that to happen. By which I mean he decided where he was going to be. He made sure that Arya had the dagger. He made sure that he gave her a few sort of hints. I can't remember all the details of it, but he basically said, I'm not going to use it. Maybe you should use it. That kind of thing. And he was positioned just in front of the Weirwood tree, because on the show the logic was that the White Walkers, the Night King, was created by pushing a Dragonglass into his heart in front of a Weirwood tree, and then the magic was undone by pushing Valyrian steel into his heart in front of a Weirwood tree. So what Bran had to do was get the Night King in front of the Weirwood tree with somebody pushing Valyrian steel blade into it, and so he maneuvered everything to make that happen. So that's the idea. Could he see that that's what happened in advance? Again, that's certainly the implication. Uber Millen saying, how common is Dragonglass? It's abundant on Dragonstone, but presumably it's common enough on Westeros for the children to use it so much. Could everyone be armed with it in the fight versus the others? So it seems to be, as you say, very common on Dragonstone. Not so much. I mean, people know what it is. It's obsidian. It comes from. It requires a certain kind of volcanic rock, so there are only a few places where it will be. I do wonder whether we'll find somewhere like Winterfell. You might be able to find some there. Is it abundant? Could everybody be armed with it? Certainly on the TV show, and this is the kind of thing that I think might well play across into the books. The Night's Watch don't have enough of it, and so they need to go to Dragonstone in order to get Dragonglass, because hey, they know that that's where there's lots of Dragonglass, and that's where Dany will be. So that kind of logic does work for me. It was given as a gift. This is sort of one of those things where we can get a feel for how common something was. It was given as a gift once a year. The Children of the Forest would give as a gift to the Night's Watch a certain number of Dragonglass things, which implies that for that to work as a gift, they couldn't just all pick it up off of the floor. It's not that they found it lying around somewhere. This had to be something that the Children of the Forest had, if not unique access to, but certainly more than anyone else. So not all over the place, but it's not rare. Let's go. Oh, Cloaked One saying, I missed a super chat. Apologies for Vulturez. Did you notice the Baratheon themes whenever Rhaenys was on the screen? I did not. No, is this in the music? They did play up the Baratheon thing a little bit, which is quite interesting. So the Baratheons were highlighted certainly at the tourney they had, and then also at the swearing fealty, loyalty to Rhaenyra. They will become important whenever we get to the point that they go seeking help. Both sides go and try and get the Baratheons on their side. The fact that Rhaenys / what will then become Team Rhaenyra gets the Baratheon themes is quite telling, given, I mean, for those who know what happens, which side they ultimately come out on. Question, but that was a good spot about the theme. The music can tell a lot, and so I've not got a good enough musical ear to always pick up on those things. So thank you. Open Q&A, totally unrelated. Jason Keane, thank you for that. Is Robert a Withnail and I fan? If not, please ignore. If so, then please say here. It's been a while since I watched Withnail and I, but it is a very, very fine film. So yes, I probably should watch that one again. It's I'm just trying to go back through my memory for some quotes, but none immediately spring to mind. Bring me the finest wine known to humanity, or something along those lines. Good film if you've never watched it. Tim B. In Book 1, Khal Drogo intended to take his Khalasar to raid the cities to the east. Did he mean to cross the Bone Mountains? Had that ever been done? No, they'd never crossed the Bone Mountains. This is an interesting one, because where could Khal Drogo have gone? They could have sort of headed off next to the other free cities or down towards Slaver's Bay. Those are the only real cities, and Karth, of course, those are the only real cities that are sort of left to them, because they swept away everything else. But although they never really thought about it like that, those other cities are a key part of the ecosystem for them. They would capture slaves, they would take them down to Slaver's Bay, they would get things in return. They didn't sell stuff, that's not how they worked, but they would get things in return. So, and similarly, when you get to a lot of the free cities that are sort of Qohor and places like that, then they paid the Dothraki to go away. Pentos was the same. They paid them to go away, effectively. So this was an important part of their ecosystem. If they wiped out more cities, then it would actually be quite self-destructive. Cloaked One picking up for Agatha Henny, Treebeard and Gandalf. Over to the Lord of the Rings. So Treebeard and Gandalf both mention the Great Darkness in Fangorn, but neither actually go into any detail about what it is. Care to speculate? I've not investigated that, but Fangorn is an interesting one. So Fangorn, to remind you, this is where Treebeard was. The situation was that the trees there, the Ents there, had been going to sleep, basically. This was drawing to an end of their lifetime. After the events of the Lord of the Rings, then the implication is that was it. That we saw the last march of the Ents. Afterwards, then they were largely going to sleep, and they become more and more like the trees that they are there or they're shepherding. So as a great darkness, that's what we have is just a slowing down of what's there. On one side, we've got the chopping down of the trees by Saruman, and another angle is the sadness of the Ents at having lost the Entwives. So that's what my instinct is immediately, to say that Tolkien works on a number of different levels, and those are the different things he may well have been referencing. But I will have a look at it properly, and if I've got a better answer, then I will let you know next time. Martin S. saying, I saw the first episode of House of the Dragon. It was amazing. More dragons than in Game of Thrones, clearly. I have not read George R. R. Martin. Does he have a general decline in fantasy elements over time within the story like Tolkien? Sort of. So what we have is House of the Dragon is at the height of the Targaryen rule and reign. The maximum, there were 20 dragons at the start of the Dance of the Dragons. Within a generation, they've all gone. Now, I've speculated as to why that is. The majority of those were killed during the Dance of the Dragons, and then no new good living dragons hatched. So that led to a long period leading up to what we have in A Song of Ice and Fire of not much magic. And the Maesters indeed are there trying to build a world with no magic. That's where they're trying to head towards. So that's the situation we have. And when we get to book 1, A Game of Thrones, it's bookended. The prologue and the last chapter are high fantasy, magical stuff. We get the others, whites, in the prologue. And then at the very end of the book, we get the birth of dragons. In the middle, leaving aside some Bran dreamy stuff, it's quite low fantasy. All of the characters that we're being told are clever and wise and knowledgeable about the world. People like Maester Luwin, people like Tyrion, scoff. They scoff at the idea of there being magic anywhere, of there being anything beyond the wall, of the children of the forest still existing. So that's the world that we've got. And it's over time, through the stories of A Song of Ice and Fire, that the magical elements ramp up. So when we're getting into the last 2 books, we should probably expect not just like some high fantasy, but hugely high fantasy. Dragons, krakens, the undead, every kind of fantasy element all coming in together. Question from Karina Strika saying, any new thoughts on the Reed's vow at Winterfell? This is interesting, actually. No, I'd not made that link yet. So for those who don't know, so we've got a new slant now on Ice and Fire, because apparently this is what Aegon called his dream, A Song of Ice and Fire. Previously, the phrase Ice and Fire has not come up much, surprisingly, in the series, A Song of Ice and Fire, the book series, A Song of Ice and Fire. One of the times it does come up is when House Reed, they send Mira and Jojen up to swear fealty to the new King of the North, which they do, but they do it in their own way. They swear it on a number of different things, including ice and fire, and the reeds clearly are magically attuned. Does this therefore signify anything in the light of what we've just learned? I haven't worked through that level of detail yet. The issue which is intriguing is the extent to which this is not just a fire thing, the extent to which this is the Weirwood network driving things as well, because clearly the Weirwood network is Bloodraven, Houndreed. That's all focused in on House Reed, and there is a link. The link is, of course, Bloodraven. When in doubt, blame Bloodraven. But also the link will be Jon Snow, who is ice and fire. He is part Stark, part Targaryen. Lady Pushkin saying maybe the doom happened to get the dragons across to Westeros. Yeah, I mean that's an option. It's quite a drastic option, but whether the doom happened, somebody caused it in order to get the Targaryens over there, or whether somebody knew it was going to happen and got them out. Either way works, I think. Drew Matthews, do you think Aegon's Dream was an actual song? I always thought A Song of Ice and Fire was just a poetic title, though Dany's vision of Rhaegar referenced it. So it did. Dany's vision of Rhaegar, this is in the House of the Undying. Dany sees Rhaegar and Elia and their baby son, and Elia says, why didn't you write him a song? And he says he already has a song. His is the Song of Ice and Fire. Now, that could just now be poetic. This is, or it could be, as we've thought, maybe Rhaegar did turn the prophecy into a literal song. We know he played the harp. We know that he went off to Harrenhal and then emerged with songs. So maybe he composed something there. I love the theory. I saw it somewhere and read it ages ago. I'm sure I've made a video about it at some stage. So hat tip to whoever came up with it. The idea that the ghost of High Heart / the Woods Witch stayed at Harrenhal for a long time. We know that they wallowed in her grief for a long time, and taught Rhaegar about prophecy, and he turned it into song so he could remember it. So was it an actual song? I personally suspect not, but this is just a lyrical way that Aegon had to write it down. Nick Dunny, do you think we will see a Blackfire in House of the Dragon, or is it too early? Well, too early at the moment. So House Blackfire came from a couple of generations down. Aegon the Fourth, who had bastard children, and one of them was this guy called Daemon, and he was given the sword Blackfire and took that for his surname. So that is where House Blackfire comes from, and that's a couple of generations after the end of the dance. So no, we won't is the short answer, but we might in the future, because what we're being told is that House of the Dragon might just be a banner that is used for a number of different stories about the Targaryens. So we'll have this, then we'll go back and maybe we'll have the story of Aegon's conquest, then maybe we'll go forward. If George R. Martin has written Fire and Blood Part 2 by that point, then maybe we'll go forward and have the Blackfire Rebellions or something like that. So not now, but maybe in the future. Mark Shisa, does the Dornish resistance to Aegon and the Targaryens after him have its roots, at least in part, in their Rhoynish heritage? Yes, so the Rhoynish came across The Rhaenyra came across from Essos. They'd been pushed out of where they were by the Valyrians, basically. And they arrived in this new home in Westeros, and they settled in Dorne, and all was good and happy. And then the Targaryens invaded Westeros with their dragons and tried to invade Dorne. Is part of their resistance a result of that memory from what happened with the Rhaenyra centuries before? I mean, I'm sure it's definitely a part of it. I'm sure it's definitely a part of it. I don't think we've got that written down anywhere, but it makes absolute sense. Michael James, thank you very much for the super sticker saying cool. I appreciate that. Reflective rambling. Oh, actually, you did this as you've just picked up for a question from Mark Sheeser that I just answered. Thank you very much. Question from Mrs. Gerard. Do you think maybe Aegon's prophecy is just for the TV shows? He didn't seem to care much about the Night's Watch. Doesn't make much sense to me in A Song of Ice and Fire. Well, this comes back to this idea of what exactly is it that Aegon's prophecy is, and what is it that George R. R. Martin exactly has sort of given to the showrunners, and how much is it expanded out by them? George R. R. Martin is not writing this TV show. He effectively is a consultant on it, and a very important consultant on it, but he's not writing it. So he's not the person who wrote all of that. But we do know that the idea that Aegon, at the very least, the idea that Aegon had a prophecy which was what drove him to invade, that's true. Did George R. R. Martin also talk about this then being handed down from generation to generation of Targaryens? We don't know yet. We haven't had confirmation of that. The writing this on that dagger, we don't know that either. I instinctively think not on that one. He didn't seem to care much about the Night's Watch. Doesn't make much sense to me. So yeah, this is the biggest objection I always had to this theory, was that Aegon didn't visit the Wall. If he really had this prophecy that this is some great threat coming from the north, why didn't he visit the north? Yes, he wanted to unite the Seven Kingdoms. Fine. It explains why he was so desperate to bring Dorne into the fold. But if you really thought that there was going to be a huge threat coming from the north, surely at some point, relatively soon, you would go... you would go and inspect the defences to the north. In fact, it took him 3 decades to get as far as Winterfell, and we don't have a record of him going to see the Wall at all, which doesn't hang that easily. When I had Joe Magician on for my pre-show live stream, he suggested that perhaps there'd been the meeting between Aegon and Torrhen Stark, the king who knelt, when the king of the north basically bent the knee and said, okay, you're now our liege lords. And Aegon said, in that case, you can keep on governing the north as you wish. At that meeting, perhaps Aegon told Torrhen about this prophecy and said, do you promise to keep defending the north? And Torrhen said, well, yes, we always do. And that was that. It's possible. It's possible. It still doesn't. It still leaves a little gap of explanation for me, but it's entirely possible. And Joe Magician's in the chat now. Actually, I was just talking about you. Hi there, Matt. Good to see you there. Donna Daly, the High Towers have significant influence over the Maesters and the Faith of the Seven. Both have no magic. Did the High Towers try to destroy magic? Oh, interesting. So the High Towers, certainly in the current story, allegedly do have magic. We have the Mad Maid and Leighton Hightower, who allegedly at the top of the High Tower are doing magic. Now, it's true that they're not like one of the big magical forces that we know of, but the Hightowers have always, forget Otto Hightower for one moment and everything that happened in the dance, they've always kept themselves largely to themselves. They've been running Old Town, but they've never really looked to expand out beyond that. That seems to be what they were satisfied with. So we've not seen huge magic from them, but that doesn't mean that there is no huge magic there. The Maesters, you're right, seem to be absolutely against magic. And the Faith of the Seven seems curiously non-magical. There are some instances where we could say you could ascribe some magical things happening to Faith of the Seven, but it not as much as, say, with the Red Priests. Did the Hightowers try to destroy magic? My guess is no. They certainly, at the start, the foundation story is that magicians were called in, and so magicians to for what was his name, Peregrine the Twisted. Someone in the chat will remember the exact name. This was where the Maesters came to start with, this idea of trying to get the best and the brightest and the most magical people in to try and heal someone. And once they're all there, what are you going to do with them? Well, we'll set up a college and they can have some land. Luna Cascade saying, hi, Robert, long-time patron here. Hi there. Question, what do the balls signify on the small council table in front of each member? Now, this is interesting. I've not seen anyone actually address this because this was a new thing. It seems to be I'm here and present. I'm putting my thing in there. I'm logging in. But although our eyes were drawn to it, they didn't ever really explain it. I've not seen it anywhere before, so I don't know. Maybe some more will come from this. I just have a feeling this is just world building stuff. But if anyone's got a better idea, let me know in the chat. Andrew K saying, in Deep Geek, I have long felt Aegon IV was by far the worst Targaryen king, as he seemed to rule deliberately horrible. And if he knew about his prophecy, even worse, even worse as his legitimizations threatened their rule. Yeah, so he has, I mean, many do, but he has this kind of Henry VIII vibe to him where he just seemed to be wanting to enjoy himself. And he had this whole string of mistresses, and his actions definitely divided the realm. If he was aware of this, then this prophecy, then yes, he's going completely against it with what he did. So that makes him a bad king. He was Aegon the Unworthy. So does that make him the worst king? I mean, I still hold Maegor up there as worse than that, but your mileage may vary. For my peoples, thank you very much, saying, with most prophecies being left self-fulfilling, what do you think of the possibility that Aenor caused the doom, paying the Faceless Men with Lannister gold? He likely facilitated trade between Westeros and Valyria from Dragonstone. So might I mean, it's a good enough idea. I think that there's some of that I definitely agree with. I definitely agree that the Faceless Men did the deed, and the deed seems to be, this blew up. This was on the 14 flames, 14 volcanoes, and the volcanoes erupted. The volcanoes usually it would appear, being tended by fire magicians of some kind. So all you would have to do is assassinate those fire magicians. Volcanoes would explode. Boom, Doom of Valyria. It makes sense that the Faceless Men actually did the deed. They would have to be paid, presumably, a large sum of money to do that. Lannister gold definitely makes sense. The question of whether the Targaryens had Lannister gold is an intriguing one, because I don't see an immediate link across there. Where I personally see the link is Lannister gold was being offered. The Lannisters had a lot of gold and they wanted a Valyrian steel sword. But the Valyrians refused to take their money because there was this prophecy that Lannister gold would cause the downfall. So my theory is that they did manage to find someone who knew how to make a Valyrian steel sword, and they paid them huge amounts of money. Could they have bought it off the Targaryens? And therefore the Targaryens had a huge amount of money, and therefore the Targaryens could destroy everyone from Valyria? That's possible. But because I love a good conspiracy and tying everything in together, my take is that the Maesters, we know that the Maesters have got the ability to forge Valyrian steel. The chains, there's a link in the chain of any Maester who is past the higher mysteries gets a Valyrian steel link in their chain, so they can forge things with Valyrian steel. They have got the technology. We know that they before the Doom, they were traveling to and from Valyria, gaining whatever knowledge they possibly could have. And we know that the Maesters don't like dragons. So there's a motivation there. Could the Lannisters have bought a Valyrian steel sword off of the Maesters, and then the Maesters used that money to be blowing up Valyria because they hate dragons? It's possible. That's how it all ties in for me. There are other theories out there, but that's my one. And I'm sticking with it until I get some other evidence. Let's have a look. I think I had another question or two. Yes, so Aspor Loki Runason. Do you think Viserys will die in season 1 of House of the Dragon? Yes, I do. I think that there are a few different places that you could conceivably end season 1. It's somewhere around the outbreak of hostilities, and all of them, Viserys has to die. So I'm not going to speculate on which episode he's going to die in, but it's going to be probably not the last one, but like 8 or 9. He says, speculate on which episode. He will last most of the season, but then his death will be the thing that obviously precipitates a war. Curtis Franks saying, Paramore Hightower, thank you very much. I knew that somebody in the chat would know that off the top of my head. Eric saying, where will all the hundreds of thousands of Dothraki women, children, and elderly go when Dany takes all the men and invades Westeros? Excellent question. On the TV show, they largely ignored that. In the books, might they come with them? It's entirely possible. If Dany is creating a massive Khalasar, the Khalasars weren't just the men, it was everybody. So if she does create a massive Khalasar, invade Dothrak and say, right, everyone head west, then everyone will head west. So my instinct is to say they're going to come across to Westeros with everyone else. I think I did have another question somewhere. Yes, Caius Ballerina. The ball is a Septarian rock, aka Dragonstone. Okay. I think there was some talk about that in the chat. I didn't read through all of that as I was going through there, but I will happily research that afterwards. It sounds good. And sounds as if somebody's done some research on it. Sarah, awesome source. Thank you very much. So just wanted to show some love and support before your schedule is overfull, creating much desired content for us all here that love you so much. Well, thank you. Excited for Rings of Power, more House of the Dragon, and your take on it all. Cheers. Well, cheers to you, and thank you very much. Yes, it's going to get quite busy here in Deep Geek Towers, but I'm intending to do close to a video every day, which I think is entirely possible. I think we can do this. It will take quite a lot of work, but a couple of live streams a week on Thursdays and Sundays, breakdown of both episodes, and I'm already halfway there. So what I want to be able to do is a few of the extra videos on top, just analyzing specific issues. Let's go to some questions from my patrons. Alejandro Martinez. 2 questions. Firstly, in the video about Arya's travels, this is one I did. This was a collaboration with History of Westeros. In the video about Arya's travels, there was a reference to the Lady of the Leaves. I'd forgotten about this character. Do you think she's another Tolkien reference? So the Lady of the Leaves is this woman who, I think she lives up in the trees, in a village in the Riverlands. And she's sort of like a village elder. Is this a Tolkien reference? I don't think so. It's possible. There are plenty of Tolkien references in George R. R. Martin's work, but I think this is probably not one of them. And then also you had spoilery tinfoil question. Could knowledge of Aegon's Dragon Dream prophecy explain Adam Valerion's visit to the Isle of Faces? Adam is not a Targaryen, but he is a dragon rider. Not sure if there's any connection there, but I thought it would provide an interesting reason for him to seek out the Green Men. Well, I think we do need a reason. We're in the middle of a civil war. Adam Valerion is there. He's a dragon rider. He has his dragon. He's clearly deciding on what to do because people are changing sides all the time. And his father is basically being captured, and he has to figure out what by Rhaenyra, who used to be staunchly on his side, what's he going to do? He goes to the Isle of Faces, drops down. We're told that he met with the Green Men, gets on his dragon, flies up, gets into a battle and dies. Now, what happened there? Was there a reason he went there? Is there a specific link between House Velaryon and the Children of the Forest? None that we know of so far. But unless it's just a, hey, that's interesting, I've now got a dragon, I've always wondered what was on the Isle of Faces, I'm going to go in and have a look, which will be fine, but this is in the middle of a civil war. It's not as if it's not a hobbit walking party. This is a time for a dragon riding party. This is a time for business, not for just going and investigating stuff. So I do want there to be a reason. Kairos Ballerina saying, you asked what the stone from the council was. Septarians' purported magical properties are to improve eloquence in speech. Well, there you go. So that's what they were there for, to help people be more eloquent. Question from Sylvia Galasso saying, ciao, Robert, ciao. I loved the first episode of House of the Dragon. I noticed the little detail about Alicent's nervous scratching. Yeah, we were talking about this before. Why do you think they pictured her that way? She also seems a lot closer to Rhaenyra than I would have ever imagined. Not sure it was a show exaggeration, but it will surely make for a more heartbreaking separation in the future. Yes, this is a show exaggeration. I talked about the sort of the nervous nibbling with the nails and the fingers before. In the book, Alicent is 9 years older than Rhaenyra, and this is quite significant. When you get older, 9 years doesn't mean so much, but Alicent married Viserys, Rhaenyra's father, when she was 18, which means that Rhaenyra was 9. So what we're seeing now on the show, when the two of them are close, they're friends, they're almost like sisters, that's an exaggeration. That's to help us to see a bond between them, which will make it more dramatic when that falls apart later on. In the book, there is a degree of that to start with. They certainly seem to have got on to start with, but the implication of what you read there is that the older Rhaenyra got, the more she realized the danger to her own position that her father remarrying presented. So that creates a different dynamic to what we saw on the show. The show will, I'm sure, show that element, but this adds in another bit as well. Martin S with a Lord of the Rings question. Did Yavanna create the Ents like Aula did, the dwarves, after which they were given life by Eru, or did Eru create them entirely at Yavanna's request? Well, this is a question of predestination within Tolkien's world. So for those who don't know what we're talking about, we get this kind of pantheon of the Valar, who are underneath the one great god who is Eru Ilúvatar. And one of this pantheon is this guy called Aula the Smith, and he made the dwarves. They were all hanging around waiting for elves and humans to appear on the scene. He got a bit bored. He made the dwarves, and Eru comes in and goes, "What are you doing?" And he's about to destroy them, or tells Aula to destroy them, and then Aula accepts this, but basically Eru has mercy on him and says, okay, they can survive, but they have to sleep for a while until the elves come first. What happened was that Yavanna then, who is like the Valar with responsibility for nature, started to get a bit nervous because the dwarves she could foresee and the humans would be needing to chop down trees and work their way through nature in order to do the things that they naturally want to do, and she wanted something to protect the forests, hence the Ents. So she then went to him. The reason I said this is a question of predestination within Tolkien's Legendarium, we're left with this understanding that this was all part of Eru Ilúvatar's ineffable plan from the very beginning. But yes, Yavanna played her role in that by requesting the creation of the Ents. Let's go to a question from Sebastian Holden. When Daemon approaches the throne, the Kingsguard and King get ready to fight. The King switches his handle of the sword to cut Daemon down. Awesome detail that shows the love and hate between the two. Yes, I don't think that necessarily was a hate thing. I think that this was a showing of authority by the king. Viserys and Daemon were close, and so Daemon wandering in to see his brother, he wasn't expecting anything, and the fact that Viserys had his sword, this was a symbol of kingship that he was holding Blackfire. It was a symbol of justice. So that's why he was holding it. I don't think he in a million years was personally planning on attacking Daemon. He had his Kingsguard for that. But yeah, this was a good little detail showing the Kingsguard, and we didn't see it so much actually in Game of Thrones, but we're seeing it a reasonable amount here in House of the Dragon already, of the Kingsguard being there and just sort of stepping in, saying you're not getting closer to the king, and that did work really well for me. Cloaked One picking up for Divine Chareka. I just want to hear your thoughts on the letter that Otto sent to Oldtown. What could the message in it be? Thank you for asking. This is something that a detail I loved. I think this is an Easter egg for us, for the people who've read Fire and Blood. I think it's a little hat tip. I think this is showing us that the showrunner, the writers, know what they're doing. In Fire and Blood, if you read it, this is obviously, as we know, it's written from the perspective of a maester who's getting various documents and coming up with the truth on the basis of it. You find that one of the key documents from that period of time is a letter that Otto Hightower wrote back to House Hightower at Oldtown that said, Daemon is too dangerous. He can't be allowed to be king. We have to come up with some plan. We should do anything to prevent that person getting anywhere near to the Iron Throne. And that, I think, was that letter. That was Otto Hightower writing that letter. And he didn't need to say what it was, because we, as people who've read the book, when we reread it and we remind ourselves, we go, yes, that's what that letter was. And that, I think, is helping show us what was going on. At this point in time, Otto Hightower's biggest motivation is to prevent Daemon Targaryen from inheriting, which is why he wants Rhaenyra to be next in line. There are other reasons, of course, but that is what is going on there. I think that this is an Easter egg for us nerds. Question from the Juggernaut. Can we say that Daemon won the fight with Criston Cole, that he just got caught hot dogging like the Viper versus the Mountain? I mean, yeah, it depends on your perspective. Neither of them really fought cleanly, according to the rules, which I think tells us a lot about them. The fact that Daemon didn't completely finish him off shows us a slightly merciful side of himself that we don't normally see. The fact that Criston Cole then took him by surprise while Daemon was celebrating shows us an element of his character that is, I mean, he could have just yielded. One other thing that I loved was the fact that Criston Cole says yield, and Daemon doesn't. He does not reply. He cannot bring himself to actually yield. He just acknowledges that Criston had bested him, and then when he reaches out the hand to help him out, he brushes it away. He is not happy, and he does not yield. Which is a really good little bit of character study going on there. Salford Born 75, super sticker saying cool, thank you very much. Butch McPorksaw, who got you into Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones? Oh, well, I will happily give you this origin story again. I think a lot of people have heard this already, but Lord of the Rings, I'll give the short version. Lord of the Rings is one of those things, and I think we've all got them, particularly those of us who've been involved in like fantasy and science fiction, whatever. There are always 1-2 things that they've always been there in your life. I cannot life without Lord of the Rings in it. I can remember as a child hiding under my covers, I had a school calculator of all of these things with some big luminous letters on, which I type 88888 to get the maximum light from, and with that light I would be reading The Hobbit or something underneath the covers. Childhood holidays, then the BBC radio adaptation of The Lord of the Rings is still fabulous listen. That would be on in the car as we're driving to wherever we're going. So that's Lord of the Rings has always been with me. Game of Thrones is slightly different in that I was in a bookshop with a friend many years ago, with a friend who picked up, this is one of those friends who you trust their judgment on books, and he picked up a book, he handed it to me and said, you'll really like this is fantastic. And it was book 1, A Game of Thrones, and I had a look at it and I bought it on his recommendation. But I discovered, this was an unfinished series. He'd written I don't know what it was at the time, the first 3 books maybe, and had thought that there were a couple more. So I put it on the bookshelf and said, I will read that when he's finished the series. I'd been bitten a little bit by Robert Jordan, who, as we all know, got almost all of the way through the Wheel of Time and then died. So that's where it stayed until I watched season 1 of Game of Thrones. And I thought, this is amazing. I'm pretty sure I've got that book on my shelf somewhere. Picked up the book, read it cover to cover, went out, bought all the rest, read them cover to cover. Then season 2 of Game of Thrones came out, and that's where I got to from there. So that's my story of how I got into both of them. Ramon Flores saying, how do dragons kill each other? They die with fire. Do dragons get out of flame munition? I hope the question is not too stupid. Love your work. Thank you very much. No, it's not too stupid. Mostly it seems to be not fire. they don't sort of flame each other to death, but it's with jaws and scratching and things like that. Most of the time when you read the narrative of a battle between dragons, it's they're snapping at each other, and one of them sort of gets the other's neck in its jaws, that kind of thing. It's not fire, it's just fighting like other animals. Question from Sarah. Awesome sauce again. Thank you very much. Picking up for Hermione. Thank you. I love it when people do this. Saying, haven't read Fire and Blood. Was it also a thing in the book that Otto was pulling Viserys' strings in the background so blatantly? Seems like Daemon was right in the throne room. Well, pulling his strings, he was... What we're told is Otto, he became Hand of the King for Jaehaerys to start with, and then stayed on as Hand of the King for Viserys when he was there. And we're told that he was good at his job. He was very competent. He managed the country well. And that's why he was Hand of the King, and that seems to be why Viserys kept him on. There was a little bit of, as you saw there was a little bit of toing and froing between Viserys and Daemon. Why didn't you make me your Hand of the King? I think we all know why he didn't make him Hand of the King. That's probably not his strong point, to be fair. But Otto was there doing a good job, and Viserys seems to have trusted him. This was actually portrayed as the high point of Valyrian rule. It was a time of peace. It was a time of plenty. It was a time of riches for people. Things were going well. Why on earth would you replace your Hand of the King? And Viserys seems to trust him. Twice he says, can we move on? Daemon, he's in this job. I don't want him doing that job. And twice that worked. He did get sacked in the end, was brought back again. But was he pulling his strings? Not so much pulling his strings in the book as trying to push his own agenda. And Viserys in the book comes across as very much a conflict avoider, and so is happy to allow his hands to be running the Seven Kingdoms, which a lot of kings did. They don't want to run it themselves. They've got somebody who seems competent. They'll let them do that. Roman Lakovic saying, what made Ryan Redwine such a bad hand? After all, Jaehaerys kept him as Lord Commander after dismissing him as Hand. He's still around during House of the Dragon. So we're not told specifically, but we are told that there's a big difference between being a good fighter and being a good hand, so it's not all problems can be solved by just swords. So that does appear to be, and this is a common theme, not just in Fire and Blood, but slightly more broadly in George R. Martin's world, is that you require a completely different skill set to be Hand of the King than being a fighter or Kingsguard member. So he can be dismissed as Hand, but actually kept on as member of the Kingsguard because you can be good at that still. Helga Björnsson saying, happy to hear you also love the BBC radio adaptation. I have listened to it countless times and will probably always be the adaptation close to my heart. No shade on the movies. Yeah, absolutely. It's a thing of beauty. It really is. It's for those who've never come across it, I think there's a link. I think I've put a link down into the description. Can't be too sure. But this was back in the 80s or something like that. It's got Bill Nye, a young Bill Nye, as Sam, who's brilliant. It's got Ian Holm, who is obviously Bilbo in the films, the Peter Jackson films. He's playing Frodo. It's got Michael Hordern as Gandalf, who's got this amazing, deep, rich, sonorous voice. It's really good, really, really good, and it's As an adaptation, it makes it more concise. It cuts it down in terms of time. I mean, it cuts it down. It's still, I think, over 20 hours worth of listening, something like that. But it's really, really well done as a dramatization. Let's go to a question from Cloaked One, picking up for Thomas the Kirschmacher. When Oberyn crippled Willis Tyrell in a tourney, the animosity between the houses grew large. How do you explain all the nobles casually injured or dying during the House of the Dragon tourney? Well, it was noted on in the episode that the explanation given within the episode was that these are people who hadn't experienced war. So they didn't really know what it was. And so it's like, and maybe a lot of them had never actually experienced a tourney before. So as a result, they came into it with this kind of slightly more rose-tinted view of it. And then the bards tell their tales. Not everyone would be there. You hear that the noble son of your house goes off and he lost in the jousting and got badly hurt or maimed or killed. Then you don't necessarily think that's such and such a person doing a terrible thing. There were no live TV replays. This was just if you saw it happen, you saw it happen. So yeah, I kind of buy the explanation that there'd been no war, so this is sport for them. Nathaniel Phipps, do you think Christopher Tolkien overstepped by removing Dagor Dagarath from the Silmarillion? Do J.R.R. Tolkien intend to leave it in? This is a question of editorship of the Silmarillion. For those who are unaware, J.R.R. Tolkien, the only two Middle-earthy books that he wrote in his lifetime, were published in his lifetime, The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. The Silmarillion, yes, it's all his work, but the editing of it was done by his son Christopher Tolkien. He had to make quite a few decisions in doing this because Tolkien, although we like to think, and there's a huge amount of truth in this, but we like to think of this as being this complete and finished legendarium that is perfect and wonderful. The reality is Tolkien viewed this as an ever-moving and changing feast. He changed his understanding of character stories. He changed how his languages worked, and he was very fierce about, this language is not changed. There are interviews with him when he's literally changing his languages that he's invented during the interview, where he starts sort of saying yes, and of course in Quenya the past tense of such ever, this word is that such and such a thing, and then he like pauses and thinks, actually I think it should be such and such another thing, and he changes it literally during an interview. So this was a changeable feast, and so the decisions that Christopher Tolkien had to make in bringing the Silmarillion together, some of them were relatively straightforward, but some of them were a lot more complex than you might think. Dagor Dagarath is the battle at the end of times, basically. This is Ragnarok. This is Middle-earth Ragnarok. And he excluded it from the Silmarillion. It is still there in the wider writings. You can find it. But he didn't write about it in the Silmarillion. Why? Because of his understanding of what Tolkien was wanting, his father was wanting, in terms of this is one of the Dooms of Mandos, the second prophecy of Mandos, I think it was, and he decided that his father had decided not to include that. There was only the one, but there are hints about what comes in the future, and it's definitely written elsewhere. So should he have left it out? I go with the view that he knew his father's work better than any of us do. So I will trust what Christopher Tolkien did, and I'm happy to go along with what his understanding of it was. Okay, let's actually very briefly in the middle of this, just while I think of it, patrons, thank you. I can't do what I do without your support. I always try and say thank you to you every single live stream. This is me doing that now. If you would like to support this channel, there is a link to my Patreon down in the description. Let's go to a question from another one of my patrons, Andrew Curzon. Regarding Aegon's prophecy, what theories do you think now need to be revisited given George's confirmation? One I thought about is the letter from Dorne to Aegon. It seems likely that Aegon would have told his sister wives, of his prophecy. So if his wife Rhaenys was captured and tortured by Dorne, they probably obtained this information and mentioned it in the letter to him, perhaps promising to assist in the defense of Westeros when the time came. I imagine his reaction was the realization that he had been in a lengthy war with many losses that could have been avoided. Just a thought. I suspect we'll never find out for sure. Yet there are a lot of things we now need to go through. And this is one of the wonderful things about this kind of thing, is because George R. Martin is still writing stuff. Occasionally he will throw things out there that make us reevaluate everything that we've got. Does this change our understanding of that? Does this change our understanding of this? If one other angle from this, if we assume that they didn't get this information out of her, we're not told that they did. So if we assume, as we always have done, that they didn't get anything extra there. If we assume that the letter said something along the lines of, we can just have peace, we will return your sister's body to you, something along those lines, and Aegon agreed to it. Visenya was against this. She was in favor of continuing the war. What is interesting is that the one time that we read of where Aegon cuts his hand on the Iron Throne is then. He reads the letter, he seems to make a decision, and he grips the Iron Throne too tight and he cuts his hand. Blood drips down. What does that signify? Well, this has always been intriguing because the rumor, the symbolism of the Iron Throne cutting someone is that they are doing something unworthy, or they themselves are unworthy of the Iron Throne. We read this: Maegor the Cruel died literally by being impaled by the Iron Throne. When Rhaenyra first sat on the Iron Throne, we hear that she got up and had so many cuts that she was bleeding all over the place to prove that she was unworthy. Whether that's true or not is a different matter. But this is interesting because what would be unworthy about that? He's decided to go for peace. Regardless of what else happens, all the reasons, but regardless of what was in the letter, he makes a decision at that point to go for peace, to stop the invasion of Dorne, to stop the attempt to unify the Seven Kingdoms. And at that point, the Iron Throne cuts him. What does that have to do with House of the Dragon? Well, we've had Viserys twice being cut, in one episode, twice being cut by the Iron Throne. We didn't see what happened the first time, but we did see that he got cut when he banished his brother, when he pushed the Targaryen family apart rather than pulled it together. Is this what we're trying to be shown through this? I don't know, but I think we need to start analyzing these moments again and saying, okay, is it possible that a good Targaryen is one who keeps the Seven Kingdoms together, and a bad Targaryen, from their own internal logic, we can come up with other ideas, of course, but a bad Targaryen is one who causes it to rip apart in some way. Harry Stanley saying, hi Robert, do you think that Daemon really toasted to the heir for a day? If yes, do you believe it was in a cynical way? I don't. Love your work. Thank you very much. Well, I think this is another nod to us, to the people who've read Fire and Blood, because what happened on the show was we saw him about to do the toast, and then the camera pans away. And I speculated whether they were going to do this before we knew how they were going to approach. But I speculated that sometimes what they might decide to do was just pan away and leave it to us to decide, which is what happens in the book. Because this is a kind of like honoring the style of the book, is that actually it's for the reader to decide what happens at various moments. We've got the evidence that we've got the different accounts. It's up to us to decide what happens. Here, it is up to us to decide what happens. It is up to us to decide whether or not, I think he did do it, whether or not he meant it in a genuine way or he meant it in a mocking way. I think I'm with you that probably he meant it in a genuine way. The reason why I say it probably as much as anything else is that this is a TV show thing, and Matt Smith has, when he was interviewed about the character, he said that he spent quite a long time talking to the showrunners about Daemon, trying to understand who he was, what drove him. Did he want power more? Was he about his family? Did he love his family? And he said that they'd agreed, he and the showrunners had agreed that he didn't want the throne for himself necessarily, certainly later on, but he did always love his family. And if that's the case, then he might not always show it in good ways, but if that's the case, then probably it was a genuine toast to the heir for a day. People will have taken it the wrong way because it was an ill-judged thing to toast, but I think it was probably genuine. But let me know what you think in the chat, whether you think if he did, and if he did do it, whether you think it was genuine or not. Question from Hermione. A shout out to you. Not a question, just a shout out to you, sir, and this lovely community, and of course some mod love. Excellent prompt. If you are watching this live, the moderators do a wonderful job here, keeping this place spoiler free, but also friendly and welcoming. I want everyone to feel at home in this chat. So if you are here and if you are appreciating the work that the mods are doing, then please do just show the moderators a little bit of love. Thank you. Let's go to a question from Kevin Warner. Hi, Robert. Do you think the Starks could know about the Song of Ice and Fire prophecy as well during the House of the Dragon or the dance? Could the Targaryens be missing or misinterpreting parts of it? Could have told Torrhen about it and it been lost over time. Could this explain why there must always be a Stark in Winterfell? So, how do the Starks? So you have a few other questions, sort of all at the same angle. Where or different questions coming at from different angles around this idea of the Starks. Did the Starks know about this prophecy as well? I mean, it's possible. And as I say, when Joe Magician was on here on Sunday, then he put forward this idea that perhaps they've been told of this by Aegon. My instinct is probably no. I don't think that's necessary to explain their actions. Yes, they did come down and help out, but that doesn't necessarily mean that this is what they should have done. They should have decided who they thought was the rightful king or queen and then marched down south to support them. So that there's no mystery there. They did exactly what they should have done. Could the Targaryens have been misinterpreting parts of this? I think this is a really important point because so much of this is open for misinterpretation. Aegon has a dream. At some point, that dream gets put down in glyphs onto, as far as we can tell, onto this dagger. People read that, but it doesn't say everything that Viserys was saying. That doesn't seem to come from there. So this does seem to be passed down by a sort of a Chinese whispers, this kind of like passed from one generation to another, just from what they remember from when they were told many, many years ago. That kind of idea. It's not a it's not a thing which got written down. And even at the very beginning, would Aegon have written down exactly, if you have a dream as vivid as it is, that whatever you write down doesn't match up exactly to what you see? He sees a threat coming from the north. Which north? There's a lot of different elements to this that could not work. Caius Ballerina, could Rhaegar have been so desperate to have that third child immediately because winter, not summer, came after spring, and he thought the prophecy had come? Well, yeah. So I would recommend that there have been so many fantastic ideas moving around to the Song of Ice and Fire community over the last few days. I absolutely love it. I've managed to catch a couple, not everything that everyone said about this. I would recommend Mr. Emma, who many people will know, has a blog called Red Mice at Play, and she's done a really interesting examination of strange things that Targaryens have done when winter's been coming. The obvious example of this is, as you say, Rhaegar immediately rushes out to try and get this third child. That would appear to be what was going on there, that he thought prophecy required when winter came back. And it was very weird. It was a very tough winter. We're told it was so cold that the Blackwater Rush, all the way down to King's Landing, the river froze. So this was seeming like it was going to be a really bad winter. But then you go back through time, you see that winter gets announced and Targaryens do strange things. So it's entirely possible that that's what's going on. If so, this does revolutionize our understanding of so many different characters within this. Yeah, we haven't worked our way through this yet. And the thing to, I think, underline is we will get more of this in the show. Certainly next episode, the trailer clearly shows that we're going to get more of this next time. But George R. R. Martin has said we will get more in the last two books as well. We will get more in the Winds of Winter. So this isn't the last we hear about this. This is just the starting point of this that we can start to work our way through. Is that me caught? I think that's me caught up in the chat. Let's go to Reuven Devender saying, hello, Robert. Hi. Do you believe that what Daemon did in the tournament was inspired by Aerion in The Hedge Knight? He was able to choose his opponent and attacked the horse instead of the high tower. And the fight against Dunk was also similar to the one against Kristen. It continued on the ground. The Targaryen lost and tried to use a knife, but in the end yielded. Yeah, so there are a lot of echoes across to that writing. If you read the description of that, I did quickly flick back, and yeah, there are a lot of echoes. The underlying thing was that Daemon, clearly he was trying to annoy Otto Hightower. He was trying to wind him up. He did it in the small council. Then he had his choice of who is he going to joust against, and he picks a Hightower. He picks his son and decides basically he's just going to he's not going to hold back, and he's going to, by fair means or foul, humiliate and hurt this person. And just to rub it all in at the end, he'll then go over to Alicent, the king's daughter, and get her favor. So that was the kind of the subtext of what was going on there. This was Daemon just trying to be really just annoying and really hurt Otto Hightower. So this wasn't just a one-way thing. Yes, Otto hated Daemon. Daemon also hated Otto. Catherine Furseth saying, Viserys says to Rhaenyra that the idea that the Targaryens control the dragons is an illusion, and that they are a power man should never have trifled with. So I was thinking about the relationship the Targaryens have with the dragons, how little control they actually seem to have over who is bonding with them. More than anything, bonding seems to be up to the dragon. Controlling a dragon to some extent beyond by bonding with it gives that person an immense power. The small council is worried about Daemon and what he might be up to. The next minute he is seen leaving King's Landing on the back of one of the largest dragons there is, but Viserys doesn't seem worried. But who controls which dragon is important. Vagar's left lying around, nobody claiming them. And does this show that Viserys is correct that the Targaryens really don't control the dragons? Well, they sort of. And we will see this, I'm sure, as this show develops, is the way that the Targaryens can control the dragons to an extent. Putting a dragon egg in a cradle, in a cot for a newborn, does, it would appear, often create a bond between that child and the dragon as the dragon grows. That doesn't seem to be a hard and fast rule every time, but that does seem to happen quite a lot. They have saddles, they have chains, they seem to, if you actually kind of zoom in, they seem to have somehow got some way of, they've driven in somewhere for you to put your foot in there, this sort of big steel. It's not quite a stirrup, but it's just like a thing that you can put your foot on top of. So they have got ways to control their dragons. But you're entirely right, and I agree that the bonding appears to be as much, if not more, on the dragon side than on the human side. It's not that the human's got the right of veto, it's that the dragon has the right of veto. But there has to be some sort of bond. There has to be some connection that has to be developed between them. I found that line from Viserys fascinating. This idea that Targaryens' control of the dragons is an illusion. They are a power man should never have trifled with. I find it fascinating because this flies in the face of everything that we get from almost every other Targaryen. They think the dragons are their God-given right. They think that they are closely connected to the dragons. They think the dragons are hugely important. They clearly, in the context of that dream, will think that dragons are important in fighting the war to come. Why then does Viserys say that they're a power that man should never have trifled with? Is there something that he knows? Is there an extra layer here? That I find fascinating, and that hopefully they will give us a little bit more of as we get into the show more. Catherine Furseth also says or asks, Aegon's prophetic dream about the coming of the winter bringing darkness that means an end of all human life. It's not so much the dream that is being handed down through the generations as Aegon's interpretation of it. And interpretations of prophecies and dreams haven't really worked out for the Targaryens, have they? No, absolutely. And this is the point I was making a little bit higher in the live stream, is that this isn't just, well, here's the dream. Everyone can see the dream. It's obvious what this means. Dreams are often misinterpreted. And the moment that they get written down, that's the point you're then interpreting what is written down rather than the actual dream itself. Dump9, thank you very much for the super chat. I didn't see a question attached to that one. If there is one, I'm sure one of the moderators will try and grab it and pull it up for my attention. Emma Scheinman saying, I know that the prophecy came directly from George R.R. Martin, but I'm curious whether you think the significance of the cat's paw dagger in relation to the prophecy also came from George, i.e. will also be relevant in the books, or if the dagger was tied in for the sake of maintaining internal logic with Game of Thrones. Yeah, I think this is an internal logic with Game of Thrones. I do not know, because we've not been told this level of detail. I don't think that was what came from George R. R. Martin. I think the fact that Aegon had a prophetic dream which led to their invasion is definitely from George R. R. Martin. The middle bit that may or may not come from him is and this is passed down from generation to generation by the Targaryens. I think the bit about the dagger, almost certainly not, because certainly it's been forgotten by the time of A Song of Ice and Fire, because this is just a random Valyrian steel dagger that happens to be part of the family heirlooms. It's nothing special. I mean, it's a Valyrian steel dagger. It's special, but it's not treated as being a matter of how we can save the entire human race. Pierre Davis saying, favorite shot of the first episode. Interesting question. There were a lot that I really loved. I thought that the cinematography, the opening-ish sequence when you get the dragon flying over King's Landing, I thought that was beautiful. I loved that to bits. I really enjoyed when you get Viserys and Rhaenyra, all of the candles, Balerion, and the two of them there. That I think that looked really good. So there were a lot of things that looked amazing. I think that some of the shots of a near empty main sort of throne room worked really well to give the sense of scale. And there are only a couple of people in here. I think that was fantastic as well. Christine Denny saying, hi, Robert. I hope this finds you well. My first ever question. Well, welcome to the world of asking questions. As a patron, this is once I will try and always answer my patrons' questions. This is regarding one of the details. I was wondering whether Viserys's fabulous carving of what looked like Valyria is from the bond he built in the short time he had with his chosen dragon Balerion, like seeing from his memories, a dream he may have had, old scrolls and or descriptions, or a combination of all of the above. I hope that makes sense. Yeah, so this was wonderful because our attention wasn't drawn to this. The huge sort of model that he'd made, our attention was it was shown that it was there, but it wasn't really referred to. It's just, this is just a thing that's there. Which part of me hopes is just a sign of quite how much attention to detail they have. They mentioned, oh, you do love your histories, and then obviously his hobby seems to be making these scale models, and I think that they don't have to draw attention to that specifically. That's a really good just show don't tell kind of moment. But yeah, if they're going to explain it, then I would love this to be some kind of link across to his love of the Valyrian heritage. And maybe, yes, he got a dream about it. So Emma, his wife, when they're having that conversation when she's in the bath, she doesn't seem to like bat an eyelid. When he says, I just had this dream, it was a real doozy of a dream, it was so vivid, she doesn't go, wait, what? You had a prophetic dream? She just seems to accept it as this is just what he's like. So the implication of that does seem to be that he's had more than just this one dream. This is a thing that he has. So yes, I like this idea. And also I do like this idea. It did come up a couple of weeks ago. I can't remember who suggested it. The idea that his link with Balerion may have gone two ways, and so he did get some memories from Balerion back to old Valyria. Question from Matthew Yardley. No question, actually, but thank you very much. Saying, just to say, love the channel and it helps me de-stress after a long day. No question, just wanted to say thanks. Well, thank you very much. I very much appreciate that. Caius Ballerina Is the green Hightower sigil in House of the Dragon only a dress reference, or are they supposed to be connected to Wildfire? They're not specifically supposed to be connected to Wildfire. The greens, this was apparently what, I mean, we know the story that there was a tourney feast and she wore green and Rhaenyra wore red and black, and hence the two groups were known as the greens and the blacks. That makes a lot of sense. But is it a connection across to Wildfire? Not really. The High Towers, to my knowledge, don't really have a Wildfire link in there. Andrew K saying Viserys no longer had a dragon, only rode one once and surrounded by people with them, surely may influence his opinion on dragons. Yeah, it may absolutely. So he had an interesting relationship with dragons. So he wasn't very dragony, as you point out, but he was the last rider of Balerion the Black Dread, which is noteworthy. So it's almost as if he didn't feel that he needed to ride another dragon afterwards because he's got all these other dragon riders around him, or maybe that bond was so big and so special that he didn't want to sort of over imprint it by bonding with another dragon afterwards. Julia Erickson saying, a long time ago, the dragons were in Valyria and the White Walkers were presumably much further north. But since then, the two forces have both moved closer to the wall. We learnt that prophetic dreams are part of the reason for why the dragons have moved closer to the wall. But do you think the White Walkers could have similar prophecies? And if so, would that make the prophecies somewhat self-fulfilling, moving the two forces closer together until they eventually collide? Yeah, I mean, this is a theory which has been around for a while, the idea that the White Walkers, the others, also have these Azor Ahai prophecies. I don't know whether Joe Magician's still in the chat there, but he's one of his more, I wouldn't say controversial, but much discussed videos was one when he built on this with the idea if you go to the prologue and are they looking for a specific person and think that they might have found it in Waymar Royce. Actually, they decide it's not who they thought it was. But do they have prophecies of an Azor Ahai figure, a prince that was promised, that they have to destroy? Possibly. We know so little about the others at this stage. Maybe is the answer we've got there. Could they if they did have this prophecy, could it be somewhat self-fulfilling? Yes, I think that if it is there, I think absolutely it does make sense that they, in order to try and defeat a prince that was promised, they put themselves into a position where the prince that was promised can defeat them. Bo Barnett, hi Robert, hope you're doing well. House of the Dragon was awesome. Very hopeful it will continue and we don't get the Game of Thrones season 7 and 8 fiasco. I believe since the story is complete, we should be good. I would love your thoughts. Well, on that, yeah, we got the news out, incidentally. This was the biggest new show launch in HBO history. This had the highest ratings they've had on anything since Game of Thrones season 8. This is a huge hit. This has been getting very high audience ratings. They are going to renew this. There's absolutely no doubt. I think they're just trying to work out what's the best way and timing to renew this, perhaps to annoy Amazon along the way, because they will want to celebrate and share this success. This has been a massive success, House of the Dragon, and we're going to have more seasons of it. I also think that this opens up the possibility for more of those other spin-offs. If this had been a disaster, if it hadn't worked, if people hadn't tuned back in again to look at a show about Targaryens and dragons, if people were just so over Game of Thrones, they would not be pushing forward with many of these spin-offs. You can be sure of that. The fact that this seems to be a huge success does seem to suggest that they might want to go ahead with quite a few of them, perhaps. Whether they wish to have an entire sort of MCU equivalent, I don't know. but they definitely will want to do something. I would expect an announcement within the next few days or weeks that they've commissioned season 2, and perhaps at the end of this season they will announce that 1 or 2 of those spin-offs are going into production. Kyle saying, where do you think Aegon I's Valyrian steel crown is at the point of Game of Thrones? Maybe Doran has it, since Daeron I had it in his invasion. Well, there's a lot of different crowns going on. He had an iron crown as well. There's where are these? One thing which is notable, which actually I think is very realistic by George R. R. Martin, is that Valyrian steel things tend to disappear. There's a big battle. Somebody who was wielding a Valyrian steel sword dies, then the sword gets lost. This makes absolute sense. Valyrian steel is hugely expensive, and if you got your hands on something like that, you could set yourself up for life. So, yeah, where is it? My best guess is melted down somewhere and turned into a huge profit for somebody. Bo Barnett, also you're talking about Rings of Power. You said, as for the Rings of Power, which although I was excited when I heard about it, now I refuse to watch. Do you feel the showrunners will continue to move away from Tolkien's work in favor of a political message? Personally, I hope the show fails. I think I disagree with this, but I'm always open to discussion of these kinds of things. I don't do politics on this channel, so you don't need to worry about me going into that world. I will say, in terms of the showrunners, I've paid attention to most of what they've said. I've not personally seen them put out a political message with this. Maybe I'm missing it, and maybe I'm just too innocent about these things, but they certainly seem to, as far as I'm concerned, have a love for Tolkien. I think that the issue is not whether they have a love for Tolkien. The issue is whether or not they are able to deliver on that. That's my concern. And hoping it fails, for me personally, I hope it succeeds. I love the world of Middle-earth. I love J.R.R. Tolkien. I would love for there to be a TV show which captures that spirit of Middle-earth, which I find so amazing. I want the show to succeed because it is brilliant. It won't be perfect. Whatever it is, it will not be perfect. Of course it won't be perfect. But I hope it is wonderful. And so I will be cheering it on because I love Middle-earth and because I want these things to be good. I will point things out and you do not have to worry about that. When I've seen it, I will definitely point out things that I do not like about it. But I hope it's good, and I hope that it is a success because it's good. Brandon Schmitz saying, hi Robert, a new patron here. I wanted to share my tinfoil headcanon. Bran caused everything. Adding his young imagination to the Weirwood network with his love of spooky stories is what woke the others and brought back winter, made magic stronger and dragons hatchable. He sent the pregnant direwolf to the Starks to give himself and his siblings their companions. Much of this started before he's hooked up, but we've seen that he's more than capable of influencing the past and then anticipated. It's his subconscious belief in and desire for magic and scary stories that brings them about thoughts. Well, I think it's a lovely tinfoil theory. I think it works really well. George R. R. Martin is definitely working with Bran on this kind of closed time loop idea. We see it's going to happen with Hodor. That's pretty built in. Exactly how might change, but the concept of Hodor is pretty built in with a kind of closed time loop. The question is whether or not that is the end, having been foreshadowed by Bran making his father turn around because he can say something to him in the past, or whether what Bran does with Hodor is foreshadowing something even bigger. That bit don't know yet. We will have to wait and see. I mean, my take is that Bran and the Weirwood Network is the cumulative memories of the people who've been hooked up to it, part of it, sacrificed to it, that kind of thing. So I think that it is not that Bran is going to be able to overwhelm it. He is going to be added into it, and that is going to be a part of it. And others, for example, Bloodraven, are also a part of it. So that's my take. I think that there will be some, not time travel shenanigans, but certainly influencing things in the past in order to make things happen in the future. Question in the chat. Callie Summers, if background music ties to the others' return or Dany hatching, or background magic, sorry, ties to the others' return or Dany hatching her dragon eggs, why were they not involved during the dance or the conquest? So if we've got background magic, this is sort of the ambient level of magic in the world, is a concept that I think appears reasonably obviously in George R. Martin's world, because once the dragons appear, other things become more feasible. People can do magic that they couldn't before. The obsidian candles start working again, that kind of thing. So why were the others not involved when they had the dance or the conquest? I don't think that the others' return is to do with the existence or non-existence of dragons. That's my general take, because the others did not return at any point when the dragons were in Valyria. The others did not return at any point while there were all those dragons with the Targaryens, and they started moving well before Dany's dragons were hatched. So I don't think that direct link is there. There's a possible link across to Summerhall, but that heads very quickly into tinfoil theory. So I don't think that link is there. But more magic is possible because the dragons are around. Does seem to be a reasonable take. Lady Pushkin's asking, who did we blame before Bloodraven? If in doubt, blame Daemon, is my take from the book anyway. Baruch Goldberg saying, so I guess Deep Geek missed my questions because I didn't tag him right. Well, he's dealing with the highborn patrons first. Don't worry, I'm plotting my way to build a house here. I'm still a newbie. Well, I try and get to as many questions as I can, is the honest answer. If you're new here and don't know how I try and do these things. I'm just a very simple Robert, and so if I'm reading something, reading one of my questions, or I'm talking, then I find it very hard to also keep up with the chat. So I just pick up on a few different questions as and when I can from the chat. I try and get as much as I can, but I will hold my hands up and admit that there are some that I do miss. Mara Lee. Hi there, Mara, saying it has been discussed about the important role that Dragon Dream's prophecy played early on with regard to House Targaryen. How do you see this role being played out in the last two books, including Fire and Blood Part 2? I'm especially curious about the role being played out to do with the prince or princess that was promised and how the others will finally be defeated. Okay, a lot of interesting stuff here. But in terms of literally the books, Fire and Blood Part 2, I have a feeling like Fire and Blood Part 1, we're not actually going to see much, if anything, of this stuff. This is written by the Maesters. The Maesters don't want to have lots of stuff to do with magic. They certainly don't want it to appear glorious that these wonderful Targaryens were there trying to save everyone else from some other magical beings. That's not the story the Maesters will want to tell, so I don't think we're going to see it in Fire and Blood Part 2. As for Dany and Jon, I think that, as with most prophecies, yes, that this could apply to them. but neither of them know it. Neither of them are aware of it, but they do have champions. Jon's got Bloodraven, and Dany has got Quaithe, who are seemingly pushing them forwards. So they may well fulfill this without intentionally doing so. And in a way, that's actually quite good, because everyone trying to fulfill a prophecy does seem to get it wrong somehow. That just seems to be one of those little quirks of how this works. If you're actively trying to fulfill a prophecy, then maybe that's not going to work too well. But if you don't know anything about it and you're just doing what you do, then yeah, that may well work. So I think that's what we've got. We've got Jon and Dany, who will be central to this idea and who will be ruling. I think perhaps Dany will be ruling on the Iron Throne. I mean, who knows? George R. R. Martin has changed his mind on a lot of this. He's admitted that. So maybe he's changing his mind on how important this prophecy is. Is this a retcon? Is this something he's had up his sleeve all this time? I think that's something to debate. Again, in the chat, I would love to know your thoughts, whether this is a George R. R. Martin retcon, something that he's only just thought of and is now trying desperately to lever this into his world, or is this something that he's had up his sleeve and he's thought about from quite early on? Kelly Johnson, when will we see Roddy the Ruin in the show? I don't know, to be honest. I'm not 100% sure, but we've only got like 4 seasons. Then season 3, quick guess. Hermione saying Carice Van Houten said she's open to an appearance from Melisandre since she'd be alive during the dance. Your thoughts? Yeah, I saw this on Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter if you're interested. Just look for In Deep Geek. I shared it there because I was joking with Matt, J Magician, on Sunday that she would be there and maybe she could make an appearance. And there were 2 options that I think certainly I came up with as possibility there. One would be someone like Alice Rivers. How cool would it be if you had her playing Alice Rivers and no mention of it? It's just like, so that's who's playing her. But in our minds, we're going, does that mean that Alice Rivers is Melisandre? That would blow our minds. And the other thing is just, I love this idea that maybe they just have her in the back of a crowd somewhere. Maybe they're in King's Landing and there's a huge rabble of the storming of the dragon pit. Maybe they just hire her like as an extra and we only spot it. Some eagle-eyed person just spots it and says, hey, look, there's Melisandre. That would be amazing if they've got, and I think they probably do, if they've got the strength of heart to do something like that just for the fans, just to put it in there, not make anything of it, but just include it. It would blow my mind. Let's go to a question from Creative Branches saying, hello there. I'm curious how much Greenseer magic, Children of the Forest, warging and weirwood shenanigans you expect in House of the Dragon. How much is possible, even if unlikely? Will we see Adam Velaryon go to the Isle of Faces? Will he find out if Daemon landed on the Isle? Will we hear of underground tunnels beneath the God's Eye? So is this any of this possible? We will see Adam Velaryon go to the Isle of Faces. That much I'm pretty sure of. I don't think we will see what happens when he gets there. I don't think we will see much by way of sort of the Greenseer powers. Maybe a few hints, but this is a story about fire. This is a story about the Targaryens. This is this half of the equation. So it's not really a thing we're going to be focusing on all that much. The Adam Velaryon thing, I think it's going to be an East. I mean, this is the kind of thing George R. R. Martin could drop in there. He could say, whisper in Ryan Condal's ear and just sort of say, the reason why Adam Velaryon went there was because he had a dream. And then that would blow our minds again. And Ryan Condal would come up with what the dream was about. And what he was supposed to do. Yeah, it's possible. It's absolutely possible. George R. Martin likes keeping us on our toes. I think the idea of a TV show that is just a pure, faithful adaptation of his work, it's, yes, he likes it, but also I think he wants something extra. I think he wants something that we will not expect, and that is exactly the kind of thing that he might put in there. Mara Lee saying, on the show we saw the role Melisandre played in bringing back Jon Snow from the dead, as well as helping Arya Stark defeat the Night King. What do you see her role will be in the last 2 books? Do you think we will see her take on a similar role or somewhat different role regarding Jon and the others in the last 2 books? So some of it seems to be set up to be going the same-ish direction, by which I mean she's been getting these visions of him in her flames. I look for Azor Ahai and all I see is snow. She at some point she will probably figure out that actually Stannis isn't Azor Ahai reborn, and maybe she should move her attention to Jon. Will she play a role in bringing him back? I don't think it's going to be in the same way. It's not tinfoil, but the way I would write this is that we've got a situation where Jon's dead. What are you going to do with him? Heavily foreshadow his body is going to go into the ice cells. What are you going to do with the body then? Well, they'll probably leave it for a long time, not really sure what to do with it. But then somebody's going to arrive at the wall who claims to be Arya Stark. This is someone who can decide what to do with Jon Snow's body. So this is not actually Arya Stark. Obviously, this is Jane Poole. But Jane Poole has been told again and again, by Theon, don't give up the pretense. Keep telling people you're Arya Stark. It's your best hope for survival. So she will probably keep on telling people she's Arya Stark, even though, there's a risk somebody might say, no, you're not. She'll get up to the wall. Nobody will know that she's not Arya Stark. Arya's been missing for years. So she gets up there. What do you want to do with this body? There's probably a fair chance that she would say something like, well, burn it. Then we know that Melisandre, or we're pretty sure Melisandre will burn Shireen. So they've got a big fire going on. Why not just throw on the body of Jon Snow there? Has to thaw out first. How amazing would it be if that was the moment that Jon came back? His body is thawed, his spirit is pushed back into his body from where it had been, presumably in Ghost. And so he emerges from the flames. Melisandre would freak out, absolutely freak out. She has performed some great magic by killing Shireen, and Jon Snow comes back from the dead, out from the flames. That, I think, will be a hugely dramatic moment, or would be a hugely dramatic moment. That's what I've written. But I think that will appear. So I think she will bring him back, is the short answer. She will bring him back, or at least she will think that she brought him back. But maybe it was actually somebody else, or a different way of it happening, unbeknownst to her. Martin S. saying, I'm impressed. This is about Lord of the Rings. I'm impressed. All the Rings of Power. I'm impressed by how Barad-dûr is described in Lord of the Rings. Probably more than anything of Sauron's. Basically an unassailable fortress. Only a greater Maya or higher could build or break something like it. Yeah, so Barad-dûr, Moria, was described as being the greatest city, the biggest city. It took 3 days to walk across this, and it was on many, many layers. So this was huge, and it was light, and it was airy. The Rings of Power, from what I've seen of Barad-dûr, it looks amazing. Like it feels like they've got this looking right. And yes, it's astonishing, and it only has 2 entrances. It just has 2 doors, and if they shut them, no one's getting in. So yes, pretty impregnable. It's quite impressive. Barak Goldberg saying, my question was the promise me to carry a Song of Ice and Fire dream to Rhaenyra and then from Lyanna. Surely Rhaegar communicated his obsession and Ned carried and protected but didn't tell Jon. And second, the dagger. Okay, so there's an echo. There was an echoing of at the end of episode 1 of House of the Dragon. Viserys is there saying to Rhaenyra, promise me that you will sort of hold this. That is a clear echo across from what Ned remembers from Lyanna. There are other echoes, reminders. There was the favour, which was the blue winter roses that Alicent, I think, had, that Daemon asked for. There's a lot going on there. Now, is this more than just an echo, a nod to the fans, the same language? Possibly. Do I think that this all landed up with Lyanna, and she had a second dagger with the prophecy on that Jon decided that Ned took north with him to give to Jon? I don't think so. We have in our in book 1, we have a lot of 15 chapters inside Ned's mind, and he does think about Jon after he sort of sent him up to the wall, and he does seem to have some sort of a handover message to Benjen, but that's it. So if there was other bit of information that Ned had to tell Jon, other than, oh, by the way, I'm not your father, and you may very well be the rightful king of the Seven Kingdoms. If there's something more than that, then the person holding that information now is Benjen. But although he was happy to talk to Jon after he's done his Night's Watch vows, he obviously then disappears and hasn't come back. So maybe. Astrid Inclinant saying, let's have a Jon fire. Yes, I like that. Very good. Let's go to another question from Mara Lee saying, Quaithe in the books played a significant role in reminding Dany the importance of knowing who she is. What do you think Quaithe's role moving forward will be, or has she done her part? No, she's not done her part. George R. R. Martin has actually said so. He's being a lot more chatty at the moment, George R. R. Martin. And when he did one of his blogs on his Not a blog, and he was giving an update, and he was trying to explain how his book was going to be very different from the TV show. One of the reasons he gave was there are characters which are in the books that weren't really in the TV show. Yes, there was a very brief appearance from Quaithe, but not that. And he says they've still got important roles to play, and one of those characters was Quaithe. So she does still have a role to play. What is her role? Well, she is pushing Dany to embrace her Targaryen self. That's basically what she seems to have been doing, and not trust anyone else. This is, if you look at what her Quaithe has done, this is what it is. Yeah. Remember who you are, fire and blood. The dragons know who you are. That's be the Targaryen that you were always supposed to be. And then beware this person, beware that person, beware the other person over there. Don't trust that person. And the clear impression here is just trust yourself. You're a conqueror. Go over there, lead yourself. So that is what it is. And that process has not ended. Even if after, relatively early on in the Winds of Winter, she does sort of decide, okay, that's it, I'm going to go off and be a conqueror. This idea of do not trust people, that was got a long way to play out, because when she returns to Meereen, she will be surrounded by lots of people who want to win her trust, including Tyrion, or people who already to some degree have her trust, like Sir Barristan. So that is going to be a really important moment, or not moment, just of character development of moving towards trusting in herself primarily rather than in her advisors. Condide saying, "Dear Robert, what do the discussions about the skin color of certain roles in House of the Dragon and Rings of Power and the way they are conducted say about the fantasy community? And have you experienced any differences in how and what is discussed? Do George R. R. Martin fans engage in different discussions than Tolkien fans? And what can be the benefit of such discussions?" Well, as I say, I'm not going into politics and all of this, but I think there is a couple of things I can say. Firstly, and what can be the benefit? I think talking is always a good thing. Shouting at each other on the internet is not a good thing, but discussing stuff is. I think that this is an important part with how we, as humans and as a culture, we grow is by exposing ourselves to other people's ideas. So I think if conversations can happen, that is always a good thing. As for, are there any differences between how the Song of Ice and Fire community and how the Tolkien community have been sort of addressing these kind of issues in terms of adaptations onto the screen? I think the biggest difference that I have seen is when you get the Song of Ice and Fire Game of Thrones community, it's actually, when you strip everything else back, it's actually pretty obvious where George R. R. Martin stands on this himself. This is his world. This is everything that he's devised. But he's executive producer of House of the Dragon. He has said very openly that if he went back, then he thinks actually it would make more sense for Valyrians to be darker skinned. I think we all know roughly what his position is on this. And that's why we don't get many people saying, George R. R. Martin must be spitting fury and angry with this bit of casting over there, because we know he's not. We know he's actually in favor. The world of Tolkien is very different because Tolkien is obviously dead, and so Tolkien fans quite regularly on both sides of the debate talk about what Tolkien would have wanted with a voice of great authority, and that's the big difference. Is that I think I know what Tolkien would have wanted and where he stood on these kinds of issues, but I think lots of other people have other views. So this is why talking is important. It's good to talk, and it sounds like a kind of empty platitude, but really this is the only way that we get better. We just communicate, we understand, we try and see other people's perspectives. We don't always have to agree, but talking is important. Anyway, rant over. Ingen Skiefos, apologies, I've probably mispronounced your name, saying, "Dear Robert, happy Dragon Week." Thank you. I really enjoyed the first episode of House of the Dragon, which incidentally, a lot of people are saying this. I think it's almost universal among the fans, Game of Thrones fans, Song of Ice and Fire fans. A lot of people were skeptical beforehand. I've seen a few people say, yeah, it was quite good. I've not seen people hate it. And I think the vast majority of people thought it was excellent. So well done, HBO, Ryan Condal and Miguel Sapochnik. Well, it was really good. So I think that does have to be said. I actually became rather emotional when I was able to fly and dragon back through the clouds towards King's Landing, accompanied by familiar music. I totally accept that the Aegon prophecy is within George's plan at the moment, but I can't help but think that he's come up with that idea later in the process, especially considering his references to the Frost poem. Or have we exaggerated the importance of that poem, reading Fire and Ice as equally dangerous to the world? So this is interesting. For those who don't know, this is the Robert Frost poem, Fire and Ice, and it's a very short poem. I should by now have memorized it, but I certainly haven't. But the idea is that fire and ice are both capable of destroying the world, and they're equally terrible in their own ways. And this is a poem that George R. R. Martin has quoted as being sort of thematically at the heart of A Song of Ice and Fire. Does this change that idea that we've got two threats to the Seven Kingdoms, ice and fire, that are equally bad but different? I don't think it necessarily does. I think this helps. This gets us to a position where we can see that we can understand a bit about more about the Targaryens and where they see their role in all of this. But Dragonfire is still damaging, and if you were to take the position at the beginning of A Dance with Dragons, and this is something that George R. R. Martin does speculate on a little bit when in interviews and also through the Maesters, through his books, is that what would have happened if there hadn't been the dance and the number of dragons had increased and the number of Targaryens had increased? Would that have been a good thing for the Seven Kingdoms? And I think his answer is no. I think his answer is actually having that many fearsome, effectively nuclear weapons round and about that only certain people can have control of in any degree. That's not a good thing. Dragons repeatedly burn their way through, and thousands. So I think that the fact that they're a threat is still there and is unchanged by the fact that they may be not just a threat, but they may also help with destroying the other threat. $444 saying, "Hi Robert, I wonder why Alicent gave Daemon her floral crown. Daemon just moments ago defeated Alicent's brother with a trick that could easily have killed the High Tower. What do the creators want to show us here? That she is a naive young girl and a tourney fun is more important to her than family health? That her friendship with Rhaenyra is more important than her father's approval, or something else?" Well, a lot of things. I think the first thing they are trying to show is the Daemon side of it, which is that he's just trying to annoy Otto. Could she have refused? She could have done, but that would have created a bit of a courtly incident. It's very clear that they were aware up there of the need not to be rocking the boat. There's that discussion when Lord Baratheon, he wants the favor from the queen who never was, and there's this muttering about, that could cause problems, and Viserys says, "No, don't worry about it, it's all okay. Let's not cause a problem here." They don't want to cause problems, and that is a matter of great high society in front of everyone else. So it's not that this isn't stuff behind closed doors, that everything has to be done properly. So there's a whole layer going on there, but she seemed genuinely okay with this. I think that she saw that her brother was not dead, was okay, and she is part of this general feeling that this is sport. This is just what happens. We've forgotten about war. That doesn't happen anymore, so it's all fun and games. That is the kind of a feel. Yes, this does put her this feeling of she can be manipulated. That's something certainly that we can see, because Daemon is definitely using her to get at her father, and that does give us this idea that perhaps her father could use her in other ways. Question from Ben. I have an odd question. While discussing, it's a bit of a fine question, if you don't mind me saying, while discussing medieval armor with a friend, thrilling, I know, it suddenly occurred to me that medieval people were a lot shorter due to poor diet. Do you think this is true in Westeros, making Dunk the Mountain and so on even more impressive physical specimens? Well, how tall is the average Westerosi is a wonderful internet wormhole to go down. I would highly recommend you do so if you're ever bored. We do have a lot of tall characters. George R. R. Martin mentions a lot of tall characters. We're told the Mountain is 8 feet tall, very tall. We're encouraged to think of him as a freak of nature. Is there something magical going on here? Is there something? This is not normal tall. Sir Duncan the Tall, we're told, is 7 feet tall. And he's obviously known for being tall. He could be Sir Duncan, the lots of other things, but clearly the thing that people pay attention to is his height. And so he is Sir Duncan the Tall. Again, I think we need to treat him as a bit of an outlier in this. When we get back into sort of the realms of normal-ish, you get someone like Robert Baratheon. Robert Baratheon, we're told, is about 6.5 feet tall. So that's 6'6". For those, apologies for those on metric system, that is roughly 2 meters. So 6.5 feet tall, 6'6" ish is roughly 2 meters. So very tall, but not, not unheard of among athletic circles. Then there are plenty of people who are that sort of height in our world, and that seems to be how he's described as like a king among men. His stature was so big and he was so tall. Others are also described as tall when they're something near to 6.5 feet tall. Someone, incidentally, you get a character like Jon, who he comes up against Stannis, standing next to Stannis, and there's a very brief comparison, because Stannis, although he's never described as being exceptionally tall, which seems to imply he must be, I don't know, 6'1" or 2 at the most. Given the fact that if you're further up than that, then it does seem to get remarked upon in George R. R. Martin's world. He is said to have towered over Jon at one point, which is intriguing, because does that mean that Jon's short? We don't really get any kind of height analysis of Jon, but yeah, it's entirely possible. So all of this is sort of rather roundabout, but because I quite enjoyed researching that. But I think the answer to your question is that the George R. Martin has got a few people who he has as exceptionally tall. The main characters that we often read about are from the 1%, so did have a good diet. So for amongst the upper classes, then probably I think we can assume that the sort of the average height is sort of roughly what we might get in sort of North America, Western Europe, something like that kind of thing. But the small folk probably are smaller, quite literally, because of a worse diet. Question from Lawnduck20, saying George likes to write characters grey instead of black and white, but I'm having a hard time finding Rhaegar's grey moment, especially if he indeed did not kidnap Lyanna. Sir Barristan never speaks ill of him, nor does anyone else that I recall. Can you think of any instances where he was grey? Also, assuming Jon does come back, do you see him going into battle flying the regular Stark banner of a grey direwolf on a white field, or will it be flipped like most bastard banners and be a white direwolf on a grey field? I think it would work perfectly. I'll come back to your first question in a moment. It would work perfectly for Jon to have a white wolf on a grey background, which is a way that a lot of the bastard-born children did shift things. The Blackfires, when it's a black dragon on a red background, that is flipped from the red on black. So a lot of bastard children did do that in George R. R. Martin's world. On the first point, are there any? The real question here is: are there any bad points about Rhaegar? Well, I think clearly his zeal to fulfill prophecy does seem to be strong, and to the extent of like ignoring everything else, he gets stuff wrong. So he starts out, he reads something, decides he must be the prince that was promised, but then he decides actually it's not him. So he decides it's his son, and actually it turns out it's not his son. He decides that he needs to have a third child who, in order to fulfill the 3 heads of the dragon kind of thing, who he seems to think must be a girl of Visenya because of the way that he's named his other 2 children. He got that wrong. It was a boy. So I don't know whether it counts as him being grey, but he seems incredibly convinced of things but he's wrong about them. He says to Jaime, when I return, I've just got to finish off this battle with the Trident, and when I return, all these things will happen. And he's obviously wrong. He's got a degree of, and we've not met him. Obviously, we just heard bits of him. He does seem like, in many ways, a great guy, but he has got this very clear, I'm in the right attitude, and everyone else is wrong unless they agree with me, which I think is quite a grey characteristic rather than a purely white and good one. Callie Summers, a Lord of the Rings question. Could Tom Bombadil and Ungoliant be the same kind of being? Ainur with Valor level power, but not official since their goals are outside of good versus evil. They could be. They're two of the most intriguing characters in Tolkien's Legendarium. Ungoliant, for those who are unaware, is this huge spider-like being that sucks in light and puts out unlight, not even darkness, unlight. And the more she drinks in, then the stronger and more powerful she gets. Could she be an Ainur with Valor level power? I don't know is the short answer with Ungoliant. It's really hard to say. Possibly an Ainur. Ungoliant did die, as far as we can tell, at the end. So the Ainur are immortal. So that doesn't seem to work there. Tom Bombadil, everybody's got a different theory on Tom Bombadil, but my personal take is that he is some sort of echo of the music of the Ainur, who is an expression of Middle-earth, because he was there at the beginning and he will be there until the last bit of Middle-earth dies. So he is in some way linked to Middle-earth itself, to the land, not just like being a separate character. Emma Scheiman saying, hi Robert, I'm sneaking in an extra question because I just watched a video by Grey Area on YouTube and she has a very intriguing theory. She suggested that the breaking of the arm of Dawn was actually a side effect of the children's magic, not its intended purpose. Her theory is that the children of the forest were performing the spell that creates the others, which unintentionally caused the continent to shake so violently that the arm of Dawn fell into the sea. I immediately love this theory. What do you think? Yeah, I've heard versions of this before, and yeah, I do like it. I absolutely sign up to the idea that the children of the forest performed some magic that created or welcomed in the others in some way, and that magic event was so huge and powerful that it took the planet out of balance. That's what makes the seasons out of balance. Now, George R. R. Martin is very clear. Don't just think of a scientific way of like saying, oh no, which angle is this at? Is there like a moon flying around a weird way, which is causing it to oscillate? He says, don't go down that route. This is a magical thing. So we just have to don't think too hard. There was a big magical thing happened, which caused the seasons to be out of balance. Now, there will be some evidence of this, I suspect, other than just the seasons being out of balance. So, yeah, maybe the Hammer of the Waters is indeed one of those things. It kind of makes sense. Wouldn't wish to say it definitely is that, because it also this idea that their first attempt to stop humanity invading was to break the land bridge. That also makes sense to me. So it could be, but and until we get further back in time, I don't think we've got the evidence to decide one way or the other. Vitamin J7 saying, just became a patron this week. Welcome. And is there a place where we can submit questions for upcoming live chats? So I tend to, on the morning of a live stream, I will put something up on Patreon that says, patrons, leave your questions here. And just do that. Leave a post there, and I will pick it up in the live stream. Martin S saying, being scared by the mere name, what would happen if the Witch King, Khamul, and the other Nazgul met Varda, aka Elbereth, in person? So yeah, this is Varda, one of the Valar of light. So the creator of the lights, the sun, the stars, things like that. Great and holy, particularly to the elves. And you find that when the word Elbereth is used, that's the elvish name for Varda, then they do shrink back. This is what happens on Weathertop. So what would happen if they actually met her? Well, she would be able to swat them away with her hand, I'm sure. They are hugely powerful compared to humans, but compared to the Valar, no, there's no comparison there at all. Okay, I have 2 more questions from my patrons, so now is a good time to drop some more questions into the chat if you would like to. John Sariani saying, when watching last week's stream, I heard you and Matt talk about how dragon riders can transfer emotions and even aspects of their personalities with their dragons and vice versa. This got me thinking about a small tinfoil. Ulf White was a heavy drinker, and his addiction only worsened after he bonded with Silverwing, who transferred Queen Alysanne's sadness and grief for her lost children to drunken Ulf. Okay, maybe not. Are there any times where a dragon may have transferred personality traits from one rider to another? This is a fascinating question. I would love to put this to you. If you're watching this and can think of one afterwards, put something down in the comments, because this would be an extra level of the dragon rider. I couldn't immediately think of one, which is why I'm asking, and I think there's always people who've got better ideas out there. Is there a time when a dragon has transferred something from an old owner in terms of personality, fears, loves, and transferred that onto a new rider that they're bonded with? It would be fascinating if it. I can't immediately think of an example, but if anyone can, I would love to hear it. Stephen Donnelly, question. This is a Tolkien question. Quite often we wonder about the nature and role of Tom Bombadil. On almost every stream, we're talking about Tom Bombadil. But I'm curious about your thoughts on his fair lady Goldberry. Tolkien's description of her impact on the hobbits as being akin to that of elven voices suggests a sort of power of her own. Now, this is a great question to end on, because Tolkien... sorry, I will pick up some more questions in the chat, don't worry. Tolkien did pick up on this. Goldberry is Tom Bombadil's wife, and he did reply to someone in a letter explaining what Goldberry is or what she represents, and he did it in such a way that, if anything, it adds more questions. It's a very Tolkien answer. He says, and I quote, "She represents the actual seasonal changes in Riverlands." So she's a representation of time, the moving through the seasons, and what happens in different points as an expression of that, which, as I say, which as a concept doesn't easily sit in your head, but I think this is how it works for Tolkien with Tom Bombadil and also Goldberry, is that he struggled to explain Tom Bombadil. He just said that this is a character that I just think is important to have. I couldn't put my finger on exactly why, but I just think that I couldn't have the story without him. And that I've always found that fascinating, because this is just, he feels that he is a part of this world. He is a part of what is going on here. But it's, I mean, George R. R. Martin would probably express it a different way, and that his muse made him do it or something like that. But Tolkien's just like, I can't explain to you. This is just how it feels. And that is sort of what we've got here with Goldberry. She's still connected to the land, but it's rather than Tom Bombadil, who seems always the same, always present, always there. she shifts and changes in this constant cycle, and that is he's the representation of things that have stayed the same and being, and she's the representation of life constantly moving and changing. Kelly Johnson saying, I remember you said that the children of the forest sent visions to Danis. I mean, I haven't said that categorically. I mean, I've said that that's definitely a theory that some people have had. It's not something that I have personally put forward in a video or anything like that. Reflective Rambling, picking up a question. Thank you for Frankincense Merchant. Would John Arryn have rebelled against the Mad King if he hadn't called for the heads of his wards as he killed his heir Elbert? So the Mad King killed John Arryn's heir, and then he sent a message to John Arryn saying, now hand over your two wards who he loved. Would John Arryn have declared war just on the basis of his son being killed? I think he would have only done it if he knew he had the support of at least Robert and Ned. I think that you can't rebel. That on its own, House Arryn could not rebel against the throne. It would need to have some allies. So we never got to see it, but I suspect that he would have probably then tried to get those people on his side anyway, and it would have ended up the same. Eric Eastman, could Meteor Man, this is Rings of Power question, could Meteor Man be one of the Blue Wizards? Maybe they are misdirecting us and another meteorite strike happens. Yes, so this is going to be one of the big mysteries of the season of Rings of Power. Meteor, it's all in the trailer. Meteor crashes, old man comes out seemingly quite confused about who he is, where he is, what's going on. He's clearly not a normal human. Normal humans don't usually travel by meteor. So he's someone different and special. Being Maya seems to make sense from that, but which Maya? I know lots of people will say maybe this is Gandalf. I hope it's not. The Blue Wizards should turn up at some point in the Second Age. So yeah, maybe we're going to get a second one, but they should have gone at the same time. I don't know. It's a bit of mystery, and this is something I don't know. Normally, you doing what I do with these kind of things, then leaks start happening. They have kept this one very close. Exactly who this person is, they've managed to keep this one tight. So I don't know who this is. I hope it's a Blue Wizard. That's who I think it should be. And yes, if it is a Blue Wizard, then there should be a second meteorite as well. Kairos Ballerina, sharing my favorite theory on Viserys's dream. A breached baby is usually right side up, so when a C-section is performed, it's not uncommon to locate the head as the first. The Iron Crown was the scalpel, and the scalpel they used had a more greyish tone like the Iron Throne, so the baby was born with an Iron Crown. Dragons roaring as one was the funeral. So this is coming to this issue of his first dream, which is not the dream we've been talking about huge amounts, but he's there, he's talking to his wife Emma. I think she did a fantastic job, by the way, the actress who did that. I thought she was excellent. For those who, like me, were wondering, I'm sure I've seen that person before, you might have seen her as Euros Holmes in Sherlock. That's where I'd seen her before. But anyway, there was this dream, and he says it was very vivid, and he thought that his child would be born, his baby son, born with the Iron Crown, and he would place him on the Iron Throne. There would be thundering of hooves, splintering of shields, all the dragons roaring as one. And clearly, son dies. This feels like this is a wrong dream. Did he get it wrong? Did he misinterpret it? This is an idea of how you could misinterpret it. I think some of these bits, so the thundering of hooves and the splintering of shields does definitely seem to be a reference to the tourney. Placing his son upon the Iron Throne, having his Iron Throne on his head, I do wonder whether that might echo forward to Aegon, and maybe he tells this vision to someone. Maybe he tells it to Alicent. This is pure speculation on my part. This is, if I were writing this is where I would go with this, is that maybe he tells this and then she goes, well, hang on a moment, you've got another son now. Maybe that was about your other son. Maybe you should put a crown on his head. Maybe you should put him on the Iron Throne. That might be where they go with this, is to inject this idea of doubt in his mind, whether or not that was actually about his son who died. So I think that might be where they're going to go with this. But as for your explanation here, that makes a lot of sense as well. It's with all of these kind of prophecies, and I think that it could be interpreted in a few different ways. George R. Martin doesn't like prophecies that it's just straightforward exactly what it means. A Jagrofess saying, I like to imagine Tulkas and Nessa as the gym power couple of the Valar. Tulkas being the strong guy bench pressing the whole gym, and Nessa his cardio bunny wife leading the Zumba group. Yeah, this is a Tolkien Valar thing. Yeah, absolutely. So Tulkas is the laughing warrior. He arrives last out of all of the Valar, and he comes there fighting away, laughing. Life and soul of the party. He tips the balance in the battle against Morgoth, and he meets and marries Nessa, who's just the Valar of sort of dance and happy times. So yes, I absolutely that works for me. They do seem to be probably the Valar that you'd most enjoy hanging out with. Let's just go to a few last questions. Username redacted. Did you have a think about my Westworld season 3 question from last week? I'm afraid I've just been so busy that I haven't had a chance to, but I will write it down straight away and I will answer that one for you at the beginning of next. Apologies for that one. That one went out of my mind because having done the live streams, I've immediately gone straight into thinking about the season. So apologies. Andrew K saying, I thought Aegon II. I thought of Aegon II also with the vision. He saw his future heir rather than the one who died during birth, especially as Aegon II wore Aegon I's crown. Yeah, exactly. That's the bit I didn't say. Barak Goldberg saying, was there no way Lyanna could have convinced Rhaegar to trust Ned to keep the secret and avoid the Tower of Joy battle? And only Kingsguard loyal to Rhaegar, not the Mad King. This is a matter of timing. Rhaegar was convinced he was going to win that battle and then come back, and so he just left orders nobody's allowed because he thought he was coming back, and he thought that was it. He was going to win that battle, and then no other problems. The idea that he was going to lose the battle and Ned would get there before he did because he was going to be dead didn't even cross his mind. So could she have convinced Rhaegar to trust Ned? No, I think is the answer there. Black Tal Casdal Case saying, did it not feel bizarre that the deaths at the tourney were just brushed over by their own houses? It was overly graphic, horrific deaths, yet no one seemed bothered. Yeah, I think that was an artistic choice by the showrunners, by the director, perhaps, to show that this is almost a decadent culture, in the same way that like Rome at the height of its decadence, you would imagine the what happened at the Colosseum and people baying for blood, that kind of feel. I think that's what they were going for, was that this was people were sort of ignoring it because this was attorney is attorney. Okay, I think with that, I'm going to start drawing this to a close. If you are, I will just say what's coming up next. There will be another live stream on Sunday, a pre-show live stream for episode 2 of Game of Thrones. I will try and get a guest on for that one. It might just be me, but I will see if I can get someone along for that one. That will be my pre-show before see episode 2 of that. The week after that, we're going straight into Rings of Power as well. So we're going to have live streams on both of those, running on one on Thursday, one on Sunday. But if you are watching this back a little bit later, appearing somewhere around here is a link to some other live streams. If you'd be interested in watching them, appearing around here is a link to my Patreon page if you would like to support this channel. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, moderators. Thank you, patrons. Great chat again. I saw there some fantastic questions. Thank you, everyone. And I shall see you again soon.